with roll call.
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Rennie.
Here.
Councilmember Sayak.
Here.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Jensen.
Here. As usual, we begin with reports, or what we call manager and council matters, of things that we have done on behalf of the town and issues that have been raised during those events that we want to report back to other council members and to the community. So I will start, as I have been during these meetings, with our town manager, Ms. Pavetti. Do you have anything to report?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Yes, I do. Just 3 items. First of all, everyone in the town should know that the ballot boxes for the November election are here. We have 2, one at Town Hall, and then a few steps away at the library as well. So very convenient, very safe. So please vote. Those voting boxes will be here through the election. Second of all, we are continuing our adult recruitment. There's wonderful opportunities on many different boards and committees with the town planning commission, library board, complete streets, other boards and committees. So please sign up. Applications are due on November 6th by 4 o'clock. And then if you do sign up, please be prepared for interviews that are scheduled for November 17th, beginning at 5 p.m. And then lastly, we are concluding our community workshop series with a conversation about on October 22nd at 7 p.m. on Zoom. So we hope that as broad a spectrum of the Los Gatos community can join us for this important dialogue.
Thank you. And I don't know if it's my computer or a general problem, but Ms. Pavetti, you were kind of going in and out. So maybe look at your setup. So we're going to move on to council matters, beginning with the Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Since our last meeting, I attended the West Valley Sanitation District Board, where most of our time was actually spent in closed session, discussing litigation with the City of San Jose, or against the City of San Jose. There have been 2 General Plan Advisory Committee, GPAC meetings. And at this point, we are reviewing elements to attempt to finalize them. I attended the town's affordable housing meeting and the county COVID calls. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Sayak.
Thank you, Mayor. Since our last meeting, both Councilmember Rennie and I participated in the Peninsula Division's Prop 15 discussion, the pros and cons of should this ballot measure pass them. And that's all I have.
Why don't you tell us what Prop 15 is for those of us who might not be aware of it?
It's commonly called the split roll tax, where they're looking at changing the business, large business above 3 million payroll taxes.
Thank you. Councilwoman Rennie.
Thank you. Since our last meeting, I attended the VTA Congestion Management Program Committee, which I chair. That VTA also had a board workshop on 9/18 I attended, and the Governance and Audit Committee for the VTA was on 10/1 that I attended, and then the board meeting just after it. The one item I would note from the board meeting is there was what I would call some efforts to derail our moving forward with our Highway 85 transit lanes. But you know, there was actually an alternate motion to try to stop our motion to move it forward. But in the end, we got enough votes to move it into the next phase of analysis. And the week of 9/24, I attended 4 days of economics of energy classes. And this is related to my board membership on the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority. It was available to board members, and I continue to choose to educate myself. 9/25, the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Legislative and Regulatory Committee also met to kind of summarize the year. That's our last meeting for the year. I attended our community conversation workshops, as all the other council members did. On 9/30, SPUR had a transit agency board member workshop, which I attended with other board members from BART, SFMTA, Capital Quarter, and AC Transit. It was an opportunity to share and learn from others, again, related to my BTA board membership. And this week, Spur is having a virtual conference. I attended the keynote, which was about how to use public open space. And I also attended today the Housing Trust's On the House conference. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Rennie. Very busy. Along with other council members, I did participate in the affordable housing session that we had on September 22nd, whatever it was, in any event, and also participated in the GPAC meetings. We did have a West Valley mayors and managers meeting since we last met as a council. We just continued to discuss COVID recovery and economic recovery efforts in the various West Valley cities, and also had a presentation on a budgeting program. With that, I thank you, council members. I am going to go to Mr. Schultz. Is there a closed session report for tonight?
Mayor, this is Shelley. He is having some difficulties connecting, so we're trying to get him in the meeting.
Okay, can I go back to that then after consent items?
Of course.
Okay, so I will, while Mr. Schultz tries to get connected, the next item on our agenda is the consent calendar tonight, consisting of 5 different items, including a local roadway safety plan that puts the town in line for various grants, a recommendation for an ad hoc wildfire safety committee to meet and develop hopefully some recommendations going forward in a very short time frame so we can get it back quickly to the council. And these are things that we generally consider to be not controversial and that can be acted upon in a single motion. That said, anyone on the council can pull any item from the consent calendar, as can any member of the public. So does any member of the council wish to pull an item from consent calendar? Seeing none. Does any member of the public wish to pull a consent item? And again, I think I'm seeing the names on my participant list, and I think most of you have participated with us on Zoom. You can go and raise your electronic hand, I'll see it. Or if you're on phone, you press #9, I think it is, to show that you would like to be heard. And as always, I'll give it a couple seconds. All right, seeing no one, I'm going to look to the council then for a motion on the consent calendar. Vice Mayor?
Move to approve the consent calendar.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Councilwoman Sayoc. Any discussion before I call the question? And as always in Zoom, we do take roll call votes. So Vice Mayor?
Yes.
Councilwoman Sayoc?
Yes.
And Councilman Rennie?
Yes.
And the mayor votes yes, so our consent items do pass unanimously. And then has Mr. Schultz been able to reconnect? There he is, I see him. Mr. Schultz, is there a closed session report?
Yes, there is. Prior to tonight's regular session, council met in closed session, discussed real property negotiations. The property that was discussed was the Ditto Lane property. No action was taken that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
Thank you. And the next item is verbal communications. Anybody who is participating in tonight's meeting who would like to talk to us about something that is not on our agenda, and the remaining may do so and has 3 minutes to do so. Because these items aren't noticed that you might talk about, there will not be a dialogue, a report, or an action taken, but you can bring items to the attention of the council if you wish to do so. Again, you have 3 minutes, and if you would like to talk about something that's not on our agenda tonight, and we're going to be talking about proposed ordinances, our below market price housing program, and continuing discussions of economic recovery. If you'd like to talk to us about something other than what I've mentioned, now's the time to do that. Okay, I do not see anybody. So I'm going to move on to our substantive items. Brief introduction about how this works. We will get a presentation from a staff member regarding the item that we are going to be considering. I'll give the council members an opportunity to ask preliminary questions of the staff member before we proceed to public input. Once those questions are answered, I will invite members of the public to talk to us for 3 minutes. And again, you can raise your hand by using that function on Zoom, or I think it's #9 on your phone, and I will see your hand and be able to call on you. when you have 3 minutes, you don't have to use 3 minutes. If you've heard your point made by another person and you think it's great, no need to talk as well, but you're of course welcome to. Once you finish your remarks, the council can ask you questions and may, so please stand by for that. Once everyone has spoken who wishes to on a particular item, then I'll close the public hearing. You'll only have one opportunity to speak. We won't call on you again. So your 3 minutes will be your opportunity. When the public session is closed, then the council will have an opportunity to ask additional questions of staff, have a discussion, make a motion, and hopefully reach a conclusion on direction that it wishes to go. So with that introduction, I am going to start with item number 6, which is a consideration of a draft ordinance to amend zoning regulations in the town code regarding outdoor lighting in town. And so I'm going to call Ms. Armour. I think you are giving us the presentation tonight.
Yes, good evening. Jennifer Armour, Senior Planner. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council members. The item in front of you is consideration of changes to the outdoor lighting regulations in the town code and in the residential design guidelines, as recommended to you by the Town Council Policy Committee and Planning Commission and forwarded for your consideration. The recommendation impacts outdoor lighting primarily in 3 ways. One, new wording of the outdoor lighting section of the town code to delete the prohibition on shoestring lighting and reword to increase its consistency with the residential design guidelines. Adding a prohibition of high intensity lights for court game areas in the residential zones, and clarifying a few words of the exterior lighting section of the residential design guidelines. In addition to the recommendation for approval of the policy committee's recommended changes, the Planning Commission has also discussed and provided 2 suggestions for Town Council to consider. One is considering addition of lighting regulations that would be based on numerical measurement of type or intensity of the light. And the second is adding a definition or clarification of the term decorative lighting. If so directed, staff could research either or both of these and bring them back under a separate amendment. This concludes staff's presentation, but I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Armour. Are there any questions from council for Ms. Armour? I don't see any. This would be the opportunity for anyone in the public who wants to talk about outdoor lighting to do that now by raising your hand. And I see no one. So I'm going to close the public portion of the hearing and look to the council for questions, comments, or a motion. And just to be clear, Ms. Armour, before we actually do that, if the council were interested in doing anything that the Planning Commission recommended, that would necessitate us going back and doing for more research and coming back with a different ordinance, correct?
It would be done as a separate ordinance, so you can move forward with the recommendations that are coming to you from Policy Committee and from Planning Commission, and then we could pursue those additional topics separately at a future meeting.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from Ms. Armour from the council? Ms. Stayock?
Thanks.
Or a motion?
2 questions and then possibly a motion. The first with to the town attorney. I know there is a move to make our standards and guidelines more objective. So having the recommendation by the Planning Commission on numerical measurements, is this something that would fit that movement that we're trying to move towards?
It most definitely would. The objective standards would go into those type of regulations.
Okay, and then the second question, has there been many complaints about lighting that requires this effort, or should this is something just proactive?
We get 3 to 5 complaints a year about lighting from neighbors, not from the shoestring lighting. We haven't received any. It was just when they started to occur, we realized they were not allowed within our regulations. But as far as neighbor to neighbor and lighting that's facing towards them or doesn't meet certain criteria, I would say between 3 to 5 a year.
Okay. And if the mayor prefers, I'll go ahead and make a motion.
That would be great if you're prepared.
Okay. I'll make the finding that there's no possibility that this project will have a significant impact on the environment, therefore not subject to CEQA as contained in attachment 1. I'll make the required finding that amendments to chapter 29 of the town code is consistent with the general plan, and that the required findings are that the modifications proposed are to the residential design guidelines are also consistent with the general plan, and adopt the resolution to modify the guidelines in attachment 2, and introduce the ordinance affecting the amendments by title only. And then the 6 is that we direct staff to look at moving forward on the Planning Commission recommendation on numerical measurements and intensity of lights under a separate amendment.
Okay, thank you, Councilwoman Sack. Do I have a second for that motion? Vice Mayor?
Second. And I appreciate that the motion included the Planning Commission's ideas. I thought they were good, but I didn't want to have to send this ordinance back to the Policy Committee.
Thank you. And I'm Councilwoman Sack and the seconder of the motion. I'm just making sure what I heard was a recommendation for the staff to look at numerical criteria for lighting, but not a definition of decorative. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, seconder?
Yes.
Okay. All right, any further discussion before I call the question? All right, Councilwoman Sack,
Yes.
Vice Mayor,
Yes.
Councilman Rennie,
Aye.
and the mayor votes yes, it passes unanimously. Thank
And
you very
Mayor, I need
much.
to read the title.
Yes, please.
An ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos amending Chapter 29 zoning regulations of the Town Code regarding outdoor lighting.
Thank you, Ms. Neese. All right, which brings us to item number 7, which is a consideration of amendments to the town's existing below market price housing policy. As indicated in the staff report, the town has had a below market price policy and program in place since 1976. It's gone through different iterations, requires payment of fees in some instances. It requires building of units in other instances. So there are changes that are throughout indicated in your staff report by strike throughs and underlines, and red changes that are basically, I would say, administrative, that are recommended by the administrator of our housing program is what we have before us. So given that, Ms. Schupman, can you give us a staff report?
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. The item in front of you is a consideration of an amendment to Chapter 29 of the Zoning Code regarding the below market price program and a modification to the below market price housing program guidelines as recommended by the Town Council Policy Committee and the Planning Commission. On August 12th, the Planning Commission forwarded a recommendation of approval to the Council with additional modifications to the draft ordinance and draft housing program and guidelines. The Planning Commission also raised a number of questions for staff to address, which were included in the discussion portion of your report this evening. This concludes staff's presentation, but we are available for any questions.
Do any council members have questions for Ms. Schupman or call in members of the public? I actually had a question, and I'm not sure where it is in the staff report, but I know that it's contained in our suggested draft ordinance, and it's from the Planning Commission, I believe, suggested change, which includes the category low. So there's moderate income, and then it also includes low. So I had some concern that these are terms of art: moderate, low, very low, above moderate, etc. Does it make sense for us to be including another term of art without including all of them? Or is, I don't know how to wrap this question up, but where I'm going is, does it make sense to include basically another category that's term of art without including all of them? And would it be easier to just say, affordable per whatever? So I don't know who answers that, Mr. Schultz, Ms. Shootman, Ms. Rivetti. And I'll see where I can find it.
Thank you. I'll start a response to that. That's a great point. Staff can take a look and determine where in the documentation it's appropriate to reference those definitions. Those are U.S. housing and urban development definitions for area median income for our county. And we can, we'll need to look at the document itself, but if that is part of your motion, ultimately to make them requested and recommended modifications, we can certainly clarify those terms.
Okay, and just to looking at the proposed draft ordinance, just even in the first section 29.10.3010 program intent, it says will be within the means of persons and families of moderate addition and low income. And so I'm thinking we don't want to be that exclusive or be that specific.
So thank you, Mayor. This is Joel Paulson, Community Development Director. So the town historically has used low and moderate. We can look at adding those other categories, but typically it's difficult, not only in the town, but in other jurisdictions to get some of the other very low or extremely low classifications in an inclusionary housing ordinance. But I think, and I would defer to the town attorney, to go into those deeper levels of affordability may require further study, which a couple of the other planning commission recommendations do as well. But historically, for sale units, they've been categorized in the moderate or low category. And then in the rentals, historically, they've been affordable to low from a rental rate perspective.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Paulson. That's really helpful. If we were to keep the language as it appears now in the draft ordinance, I'm assuming that does not preclude us from, if someone were to offer a very low, from putting it in the program. Is that a correct assumption?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay. All right, other questions, Mr. Rennie?
Thank you, Mayor. And I might have a disconnect here somewhere. When I read the staff report, it talks about points. And I'm assuming that we're talking about points of applicants. And it talks about, like, say, number 8, we could give more points to very low or low, so there's more participant in. Is this really for applicants, or is this for? I'm not understanding. There seems to be a disconnect because a developer comes and they offer a certain level of affordability, and then I assume applicants come and, you know, if they're offering a moderate, moderate level affordability, but somebody at a very low comes, they still have to pay the moderate, right? I'm confused on how what the developer is offering versus the people that are coming, how this is matching up.
So if Ms. Shootman would like, I can jump in, or you can go ahead and get started.
I'll start and you can finish if you need to. So our program sets a point system to rank those, but our program also provides that a developer must provide 50% moderate and 50% low income. If there is a difference in a factual calculation, you would round up to a whole number for the low income units and round down for the moderate.
And then just to add on to that, Councilmember Rennie, so the developer applicant has to meet the low or moderate requirement. One of the suggestions from Planning Commission was that maybe in the point system, which is for applicants for those units when they become available, they get additional points, so that would help them be more competitive in the selection process. There is a potential challenge, and we have not looked into it, but the potential challenge is if you, as you suggested, you have a moderate unit, they have to pay moderate rent. If you have someone that's very low income, they still may not be able to pay that moderate level rent. So that could be a little bit of a disconnect, but that's something that, again, we could do more study on if that is something that the council is interested in pursuing.
Okay, I think that answers my question, but makes me more disconnected maybe.
But Mr. Paulson, before I go to Councilwoman Sack, just to make sure that we're clear on that, we are looking at two different things tonight. We're looking at one, an ordinance with proposed amendments, and two, we're looking at housing program guidelines. And the guidelines are where we see the points, both for developers and for applicants, not in the ordinance. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so we have to keep those two things separate. There's an ordinance amendment, and then there's points that are contained in the guidelines. And the ordinance is attachment 2, and the guidelines are attachment 3. So Councilwoman Sack.
And I'm not sure who this question goes to, but if a developer were to utilize the density bonus, the state density bonus, do any of the changes that we have proposed magnify what they can receive? For example, don't they get more units if they go into extremely low as well as very low? And does this in any way affect that model?
So I can start, and then if the town attorney or town manager have anything additional, this wouldn't affect the state density bonus law. It has its own provisions of what amount of density bonus you get based on the affordability level and the percentage. So this would not affect the state density bonus law as far as my knowledge goes.
Okay.
Mr. Schultz, is that correct?
Mr. Schultz is nodding his head.
Okay.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Other questions from the council? Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's a question of staff, and it's just to tee us up in our discussion, and also maybe for the benefit of people who may testify. Could somebody from staff just tell us what the levels are? We've been throwing around words, low, very low. Can you just give us the levels, and we'll start with that.
Sure, so I'll start. Our housing program guidelines separate them out depending on if it's a for sale unit or if it's a purchase unit. For the for sale unit, the current guidelines allow for an applicant's annual household income to be no greater than 100% of the median family income. The recommendation from the policy committee and the planning commission would be to modify that to 120%. And if we're looking at a rental unit, currently the guidelines state that a household annual income must be no greater than 80% of the median family income. And that's also proposed to be modified to 120%.
And then for a little further clarification, Vice Mayor, so typically extremely low is 30% median income or below. Very low is 50% and below. Low is 80%. And then moderate is 80 to 120.
Thank you.
Other questions before I open it up to members of the public? Okay, I don't see any. If you are participating with us tonight and you'd like to talk to the council about these proposed changes to our below market price housing ordinance and guidelines, now's the time to do that. So I'll give it a couple seconds to let people get their hands up. Okay, I've got 3 hands up right now, so I'm going to go ahead and call on the first one I see, who is identified only as Amy. So Amy, if you'd unmute yourself.
Hi, my name's Amy Nashide, and I have a couple questions. I thought part of the intent of affordable housing was to make Los Gatos more inclusive and increase racial diversity in the town. So given that, on the second page under the purpose, part A, should something about increasing socioeconomic and racial diversity be added to the purpose? And I may be misreading it, but to me, the point system doesn't look like it would do anything to increase diversity it seems to reward people who already live in town, which, is fine, but I wonder if perhaps the point system could somehow encourage diversity to bring new people into town. And then a question also about the in lieu of fees. Is this a different amount than what we had before, or is it the same? And I know there was some either discussion or suggestions at the forum to increase the in lieu of fees a little bit. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Nishida? Seeing none, we're going to go to the next speaker, who's Matthew Hedis.
How come they don't answer?
We just take on in this, we don't answer, it's not a dialogue like it is in the forums. That's why the community listening events are different than what you're seeing here. Here we take your testimony, we can ask you a question, but we don't engage in a dialogue. So sorry to disappoint you, but that's how these proceedings work. So Mr. Hedis.
Thank you, Mayor Jensen and council members. I just wanted to provide a little explanation for some of the reasons why I made some suggestions at the Planning Commission, which I believe were adopted. So I'm just speaking on behalf of my own opinion. By raising the income level to 120%, there's an unintended consequence of having a larger pool for a very limited number of units, and that is that folks of the lowest income levels would be competing with folks with a larger pool of folks. So going from 80 to 120 brings in more people into the pool. And that's why I proposed giving extra points to very low and low income people in order to be able to compete for a very, very scarce resource that's there. The rest of it, I think, is explanatory. I just wanted to clarify that point.
Any questions for Mr. Hedis? Seeing none, I'm going to move to the next speaker, who's Jeffrey Suzuki.
Hi, everyone. So
Hi.
I believe that we should deeply consider the idea that future BMP units are rental as opposed to owned. This statement's not about making home ownership as a whole a more attractive idea. I think that we need to question the idea as a whole. Do we really want to forfeit our ability to provide affordable housing for those with low and moderate incomes? Because even if we solve the issue of reducing the down payment dramatically and make home ownership more affordable for those that we currently block out with the lump sum that they're required to pay for the affordable unit, we still have to deal with the fundamental issue that after a certain point, we will likely have an affordable unit occupied by someone who doesn't need it. The low income or moderate income house effectively no longer becomes a low income or moderate income house. And additionally, I want to draw a point of comparison here to make it very real, which is a comparison to student loans. There's a reason why many working class folks actively avoid going to college, because despite better long-term economic prospects, the student is in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. Similarly, in this BMP program, new homeowners may purchase a home. However, despite long-term better economic prospects, the homeowner is also in hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. If we really want to maximize the accessibility of Los Gatos to these folks, I believe that we should strongly consider formally de-emphasizing home ownership in the future and emphasizing rents. I did have a question on this, and I think that it should be looked closely, which is on section C.1, which is that 50% of the units in a project shall be, the wording has been changed to should be priced to be affordable to moderate income households. So the shoulds have been changed to shall. I mean, the shalls have been changed to should. I'm wondering why that is the case. Shall makes it imperative that you should do something. I see the should as possibly being a point of weakness in the policy. I still don't understand why we're raising the income ceiling when we should be targeting our housing towards low, moderate income folks. Making the pool larger makes it less accessible because, as Matthew here has pointed out, they're competing against the larger pool. And as a final note, there has to be some mechanism, whether in the BMP or the general plan, where the town should automatically approve purchasing, raising money to purchase units, to create BMP units, or approving development if it's not meeting its affordable housing obligations. Socioeconomic and racial diversity should not be a political question. And given how there is systemic racism, there has to be systems in place to proactively automatically impose means to combat it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Suzuki. Any questions for Mr. Suzuki? Okay, I don't see any, and I don't see any other hands raised. If you'd like to talk to the council about this issue, now's your opportunity, or I close the public hearing. Okay, I see another hand raised, and that's Maria Ristow. Ms. Ristow?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, along the lines of the affordable housing rental versus ownership, I think it is really important that we be pushing more rental units. And that may happen anyway, in terms of the fact that knowing with our next housing allocation, at least in terms of the general plan update workshops I've attended, the conversation centers around the fact that while Los Gatos right now is 80% single family and 20% multifamily homes, that the new housing we plan will likely have to be 80% multifamily and 20% single family housing. But that doesn't mean that that multifamily housing won't be townhouses or condos. And I think we need to make sure that we do have rentals. We have opportunities for people to move in at a variety of times, that when people's incomes go up and they no longer need to be in that affordable housing, that we do open it up to other people. And it's been pointed out by other speakers, our housing is probably the largest barrier to diversity in this community. And we need to make sure that we're making that option available to increase the diversity in our community, both economically and socioeconomically and racially. So I would really like to see us pushing toward more rentals. In terms of what the town does with its in lieu fees, I would hope that we very infrequently, if ever, take in lieu fees in the future. But I think it is an interesting idea to use them to convert existing market rate housing, apartments or other things, into affordable units, because trying to build new housing with those fees is pretty prohibitive, and we're not going to get very far with that. It might be easier to acquire existing units and make them affordable. Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Ristow? Thank you very much. Lee Quintana.
She's using an older version of Zoom, so she's not able to talk.
So how do we get her input?
I can promote her to panelist.
Okay, so we often do this for Ms. Quintana, so I can't make you upgrade your Zoom, but it sure would be lovely. So why don't we do that for purposes so we capture her input. Okay, Ms. Quintana, anytime you're ready.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I agree with the previous speakers who encourage emphasis on rental rather than purchase. I also wonder whether there should be what I'm trying to say is that obviously our BMP program does not fill our needs for low and moderate housing in the town. So I think we should be looking at other mechanisms as well. But even within the below market rate, the requirement that the units are the same size as regular market rate units would seem to me a hindrance in developers being willing to provide more BMP units than they're required. If the units were smaller, they wouldn't cost as much, and the rental probably wouldn't be as high either. I also I have a major concern with raising the rate to 120. Within the packet we got, there was a nexus study from Santa Clara County. There was no other jurisdiction in that study that had as high a rate as 120. The highest rate for moderate went up to 110. By raising the rate, you're still making it harder for people of lower means to qualify for the units because they may not be able to afford the unit even if they qualify by the point system and the level. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Quintana? Seeing none. Anyone else? Now's your chance. Okay, I don't see anyone raising their hand, so I'm going to close the portion of the hearing. Look to the council for additional questions they may have of staff. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, question of staff. I don't know who on staff. Understanding that this proposal came from the Policy Committee, on which I serve, and then to the Planning Commission and to here. But since the Policy Committee made its recommendation, we've also had the community meeting, which discussed, amongst other issues, housing. And I found that the information received there and the testimony to be very strong, very powerful. So my question of staff is, if instead of what is coming forward, we changed to, as several people have said, rental units, and we got rid of the 120 and we went with extremely low, very low, 80%. If we did that instead, is it doable? What would have to be done? How does it relate to what we're doing tonight?
So I'll go ahead and get started and then see if Mr. Schultz or Ms. Pravetti or Ms. Shootman have any additional comments. So if we want to modify to the lower affordability levels, I believe we would probably have to do a nexus study. There was a nexus study done by Santa Clara County, a number of jurisdictions. The town did not participate in that. So we would have to do a similar study. There's a number of options. If the council is interested in going to a rental only model, then that would require some significant modifications that would for sure necessitate changes to what's before you and probably lead to going back to the Planning Commission for consideration. Again, I would defer to the town attorney to confirm that, but I would believe that would be necessary. And so ultimately, we've heard a lot of comments, and we did hear a lot of great comments at the workshop as well, which are attached to your staff report this evening for consideration. So if that's something the council is interested in, kind of a wholesale revised look at this, then that's something staff can do. The one reminder I would provide is that the reason the Policy Committee initially considered going up to the 120 was specifically for the teacher housing project, which was a proposal of that applicant because of the challenges that it would create for teachers unless they were single individuals to qualify under our current requirements. So that was kind of what led or started that discussion. So I just offer that as well. And then if there are any specific questions, we're definitely more than willing to answer those as well. And I believe Ms. Pravetti has some additional comments.
Thank you, Director Paulson. I just wanted to add that if this were to become a rental only program, then we would probably reduce the amount of affordable housing actually being produced in Los Gatos, because a lot of the developers are preferring to build ownership housing in Los Gatos. So if they have a proposal for ownership, we can't compel them to then make some portion of that project rental. We would essentially lose the ability to do affordable housing at all if it's ownership. The way the program is structured now is that we get a certain amount of affordable housing regardless of tenure, whether it's rental or ownership. So I think we would be, and again, it's a lot of housing economics in terms of what a builder wants to build, but we're not seeing a lot of rental housing coming forward here in Los Gatos, but we are seeing ownership housing. So that's just a consideration for the town council as you consider the parameters.
Follow up from the Vice Mayor?
Yes, follow up. Thank you, Ms. Pravetti. That makes sense. With regard to Mr. Paulson, why would we need a nexus study if basically we keep the same percentages that we have now rather than bump it up to 120%?
So again, I would defer to the town attorney, but because you're making it more of an impact on the developer with the lower rental or for sale requirements, it's more of a fiscal impact to a developer to go down to those deeper levels of affordability. And then I'm not sure if the town attorney has any additional input or thinks otherwise.
Before we go to Mr. Schultz, I guess I'm not understanding Mr. Paulson. From what do we have now, and what is your understanding of what I just said I would maybe like to keep?
So I'll try to give you an example. So let's say someone comes in, they're building 10 houses. We'll just say for sale for this example. They're going to sell them for $1 million. They're required to have one moderate level BMP. They're going to sell that house for $400,000, let's say, for discussion purposes. So that's a $600,000 delta. As you go down into the low, very low, and extremely low, that delta becomes larger, meaning it's more of an impact monetarily on a developer. So that might be seen as an impediment. And so once you start impacting once you start impacting the numbers, then that's generally what may trigger that. And I believe Ms. Pravetti has additional information.
And before Ms. Pravetti talks, what I think I'm asking about is staying the same as we are. And why does that need a nexus study?
That absolutely does not. Sorry, I did not understand the question. That if we keep it the same and don't change to the 120, then that's not something that would require a nexus study. I was answering a question that apparently you weren't asking, which was going to deeper affordability.
You were, and thank you.
And the only ramifications were, as Mr. Paulson pointed out, is one of the reasons why the policy committee took this issue up to the 120 was because of the Ditto Lane property.
Before we go on, I'm confused. I just want to clear up, at least for me, I was confused by something Mr. Paulson said. It's my understanding that when we went through this as the policy committee and we recommended the 120%, that does not require a nexus study. I thought I heard Mr. Paulson just say it does. Which is it?
No, it does not require a nexus study. What's before you today? I was answering a question if you wanted to go down to very low or extremely low, then that would, in my opinion, require a nexus study.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? I have some questions. Councilwoman Sayoc.
So before we move away from the nexus study, in the staff report, it says, though, if we are looking at increasing in lieu fees, that requires a nexus study. Is that correct?
That is also correct.
Okay. And again, it's because of that affordability component that may impact a developer's ability to create housing. Is that correct?
Well, it's the potential impact to a developer. So we would do that nexus study so that we have the justification to say either our current 6% is right, it's too high, it's too low, and then we could make that decision. You could make that decision as a council based on that information provided in that study.
Okay. And then my second question, before we move away from the 120, we've been talking about affordable housing for a long time, and as everyone can see, it's pretty complex. When I was on the policy committee, one of the issues that we were trying to also address was combined income. And correct me if my memory's correct, if it's wrong or if it's flawed, but in that, let's say we rent it out to a 2-bedroom, and both it's a dual income. It now bumps, even though we are trying to afford a home for extremely low or low income, the mere fact that both incomes now bumps them up, their combined income. And what we're seeing is that 100 to 120 is the sweet spot where you can accommodate that family. And so I just want to make a reminder that we were also trying to fix that problem where dual incomes in a combined household were no longer getting affordable housing. Is that, am I remembering this incorrectly?
No, I think that's a legitimate point. So if you have a couple that's part of the household, we would look at all the incomes. Even if you have a child living with you, we would look at those combined incomes. So it could have an effect on, and again, getting back to the teacher housing, if you have a teacher whose spouse or roommate or partner also works, if they get outside of that 2-person threshold for low or even median, which is what our current is, then they would not qualify.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor. All of this has generated more and more questions. Let me start with Ms. Pravetti was talking about if we tried to require rental in an ownership development, she was saying we would not end up with the developer building any units for affordability. And I'm assuming that's because of their financing model. They're taking out loans and they're effectively need to pay them back, and they wouldn't want to rent it because they're not getting their money back, their capital back as part of this, their typical financing model for that project. Is that what's going on?
Well, basically, yes. Typically a developer knows upfront, are they going to be building for sale? Because there are different construction requirements for sale housing versus for rental. So they know upfront it's going to be ownership or it's going to be rental. We do get some home builders that will build to condominium standards, thinking that later the project may start out as rental, but over time they may sell off the units as ownership. But I can't think of any housing project that is a mixed rental ownership combination. It's either all one or all the other. So you would not be creating more rental housing if you ask a for sale builder to build apartments. They're just not going to do it.
Well, what if they are building, let's say it's a housing development. Sisters Court is one of our last ones. It's probably not a great example because the houses are so expensive, but they probably paid it in lieu fee rather than provided an affordable house. Is that correct?
They did not. We had made some provisions after that development came through. And this is part of the evolution, which I won't go back too far. But up until pretty recently, if you had a standard subdivision, the town did not require BMPs. We made that change. So now we do require for standard subdivisions. So they didn't have to provide a unit or pay. Maybe getting towards your point, if you have a housing development, let's just use that one as an example, even though they aren't BMPs. If they were required to build a BMP, they are typically want to get rid of that and sell it, even if it's at the affordable rate, because most developers, it's pretty atypical that they want to be landlords moving forward in a development that they've completed. So it's I've seen it a couple times, but it's not very common, especially nowadays, that a developer, whether that's a large developer or a small developer, wants to hold that property as a rental and rent it as a BMP for a long period of time.
But I know, in Los Gatos, we use, I think it's Hello Housing, to manage rental properties. They could maybe sell it to the town or turn it over to the town, and we would manage the rental from then. They probably would want to sell it. We have money in our BMP program, so we could buy these for a little bit of time until we run out of money.
So that's definitely an option. The town could choose to use BMP and lieu funds or that we currently have or that we acquire in the future to basically purchase at the affordable for sale rate that unit from the developer. And then that's a pretty big decision as to whether or not the town would like to be a landlord as well.
And Mr. Rennie, is that your questions for now?
I had some other ones. I'm still digesting that portion of it. On the Ditto's Lane, we talked about wanting a higher, the 120 for the teachers on Ditto's Lane. I believe the issue on Ditto's Lane is it's an RDA site, so we have to put affordable housing there. Isn't that governed by a state affordable housing level? If we change our BMP guidelines, that's not going to have any effect on what has to be in Ditto's Lane, does it?
It does not. So the moderate level is, as I mentioned, from 80 to 120. We're still requiring, even though we're increasing, as Mr. Hudis and others mentioned, we're increasing the pool potentially of who will qualify for that unit, but you're still only required to pay the 80% fair market rent based on that BMP level. So it's not going to be an issue from that perspective, because for the town, it's still a low unit from an affordability perspective. So that won't be an issue in that instance.
And if I may just add, because the town has entered into separate agreements or is in the process of working with Ms. Chafin on the teacher housing, we can specify what level of affordable the town would like to see in that development. So you can retain, as the vice mayor says, the existing affordability levels, knowing that the Sarah Chafin project is independently taken care of through those unique agreements with the town.
And let me just go back and ask one question. So we talked about rentals in ownership. Right now, I think I read that if it's ownership, the BMP has to be ownership, right? We could remove that and say, it doesn't have to be, or we would even like it to be. It sounds like requiring it to be could be an issue, but we could certainly modify that language, correct?
So there's actually a proposal to modify that language. The existing language is shall, we're changing it to should, to provide some flexibility should a future planning commission or council decide that that's an option, or should a developer come forward and be interested in that type of arrangement.
But even by having should, it makes them think, oh, I'm not supposed to have rentals, when in fact, maybe we want to encourage rentals. If there's anybody that would actually be willing to do it, I don't want to discourage them. I think
is that a question or a comment?
I think that's some of both, I guess.
I think it's a comment.
Yeah. I'm gonna stop my questions for now.
Okay, thank you. I was going to ask some questions or make a comment, Ms. Betty, but if you want to go ahead, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment about rental. I know that there's a lot of interest, and there's certainly a huge need for more rental affordable housing in the town. I want to make sure that the council knows that the BMP program is not the only way we can incentivize rental housing. The good work of the General Plan Committee to increase density, look at different housing types, look at different housing models is actually going to also contribute to more affordable housing. So, so you have some other options that you will be considering in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bravetti. I don't think this is a question. Maybe it'll evolve into a question, but I want to just make a comment on some of the stuff as a member of the policy committee and also as a member of the general plan advisory committee. First, let me agree with Ms. Bravetti that I think one of the most effective ways for the town to get affordable housing is to change our general plan and guidelines for setbacks, heights, densities, and residential zoning so that we provide opportunities for developers to build different types of housing which can be affordable. My other comment is that remember that the town isn't a developer. We have to rely on nonprofits or for-profits to provide housing. So I was going to comment on the 120% inclusion. The 120, well, I'm going to step back a minute and say what we're trying to do through this program, at least in my mind, is create opportunities for housing. And the more we circumscribe the types of housing, the people who qualify for housing, our numericals or whatever it is, the more I think we circumscribe opportunities to produce housing. And I'll go back to my first round on the housing element advisory committee where the town did put forward very low, et cetera, categorizations for our affordable, our affordable housing overlay zone, only to be told by the state that those types of circumscribed categories could result in discouraging housing production. And so would not approve our housing element until we took them out. So going on from that, on the 120%, there is a known concept in housing these days called the missing middle. So you might be able to qualify for a unit if you're very low, you might be able to qualify if you're low. But if you're a teacher earning 60,000, you're married to another teacher earning 60,000, suddenly you're not low, you're not very low. You're maybe moderate, but you sure as heck can't afford a house in Los Gatos. So if we were going to produce housing, for using Ditto's Lane for an example, for a teacher who is a part of that missing middle, that gives those people the opportunity to qualify for a home. So in my opinion, my little opinion here, increasing the pool is a good thing. We want to produce housing and we want to make it available to the most people that we can. So in my mind, increasing that opportunity for housing is good, and not putting too many categories on housing to encourage developers to get in here and do something is good. And not providing loopholes like an in lieu fee is good. However, when we do get fees, and we could get them from other means. For example, when somebody comes into the planning commission and wants to remodel a house and they increase the value of that house by $2 million by the remodel and it's a spec, there is something called value capture where the town could theoretically come in and say, you know, how we approve, we took a governmental action to increase the value of that property. We want some of that back for our affordable housing. Thank you very much. So there are lots of ways to do this. The below market price program is one way. And to my mind, what we want to do ultimately is produce housing. We want to try to make you do it. If you want to build for sale, yay. If you want to build rental, yay. And if you're a part of the missing middle and we can provide housing for you in Los Gatos, yay. That's not to say that we're not looking for every opportunity to get a diverse and inclusive community, but what we have to have housing first before we can do that. So I would hate to see us take some action that might discourage the production of that housing. So that is my speech. And as a member of the policy committee, having brought forward these recommendations, I do think they're a step in the right direction. I think the next step has to happen at General Plan Advisory Committee, where we change our underlying notions of what can get built where, how dense it is, and what happens with it. So I saw the Vice Mayor first and then Mr. Reddy. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This will be a question of staff, probably Mr. Paulson. So we can put face on what we're talking about, if you could go through the levels of affordable housing that we currently have and the maximum amount of money, let's say right now, that a person can earn to get one of those levels?
Well, that's a great question. And unfortunately, I'm not sitting in my office and did not bring that sheet with me. But generally, what we can do is I'll just give you actually, let's do this. Let me see if I can dig out a laptop, pull up those affordability levels, and then that way we can get you that actual answer. And maybe we can answer a few other questions in the meantime.
So while Mr. Paulson is doing that, can I then call on Mr. Rennie, or Vice Mayor, did you have another question?
No, I don't have another question. I'll wait.
Okay, so Mr. Paulson, if you can get to work on that, that'd be great. Mr. Rennie?
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to provide alternate thoughts to yours. I agree generally we want to generate housing. And I was going to mention the missing middle. The reason we have a problem with the missing middle is we're making efforts countywide, statewide, to build affordable housing, and that takes money, and there's being money put in. You'll see, like San Jose, they'll build a very large, affordable only kind of housing because there's been, basically grant money from the state or the county or the bond or something of that sort to create the affordable housing. A lot of developers want to turn around and build high-end housing because there's more profit in it, and they have to provide some below market, so it balances out the below market. And the missing middle, for the teachers and the police and so forth that you mentioned, people in that just to make a little, too much with a couple, there isn't enough housing being generated of that sort. Somebody mentioned, maybe it was Mr. Paulson or Ms. Bravetti, that we can do, maybe even we can do other things to encourage that kind of housing by increasing the density, encouraging more apartments or condo complexes or more multifamily kind of dense items. I hesitate to take away from, the requirement or even putting people that make more money in a lower income paying house. And the reason for that is it takes a lot of money to finance. When you have if you can get a very low income or low income unit, that's being sold or really rented well below what the cost is. So that money has to come from somewhere. And so it's difficult to get a lot of those units. We are being estimated that our next housing element, I think our latest is 1,930 units we're going to have to plan for. And I looked in that and I saw 25% of those are supposed to be very low. And the first thing I think about, and I think it's probably another 25% for low, but I remember it's almost 500 units for the very low. That's going to take somebody financing 500 units below cost. So if we can get every unit we can get that far below cost, I don't want to give it up because they're going to be hard to get. In Los Gatos, back to my other thing about, lots of affordable housing being built. In Los Gatos, we really don't have very much affordable housing, especially at the very low or the low levels here. So it's not, we're missing the middle and we're missing the low here. So I don't want to give up getting any more of the lower levels to get more of the middle. We should be achieving it in another way. And I'm happy to have you to rebut my comments.
We'll wait and see. Mr. Paulson, did you get the answer to Ms. Spector's question?
I do. So I do have a chart from the workshop. And so it goes by household from 1 to 6 persons. So I'm just going to give you, I'll start with 2-person household. And then we can move up from that if you'd like. So for the extremely low, the maximum income for a two-person household is $37,900. For a very low household, it's $63,200. For a low-income household, it's $89,750. And for a moderate household, it's $135,900. And that moderate is up to $120,000. The median.
Yes, I was going to ask you, can you convert those to the percentages so that if we were to take it to 120%, which one of those numbers does that apply to?
So that would be the moderate. 120 is 135,900. The median income, which is 100%, which is what we currently utilize, is 113,300. The low is 80%, between 50 and 80, which is 89,750. Very low is between 50 and 80, which is 63,200. And extremely low is between is 30 and 50, which is 37,900. And that again is a 2-person household.
Thank you. Ms. Spector, did you want to follow up on that? You don't have to, but just wanted to make sure that that answered your question.
It did.
Okay, other questions from the council? Other comments? A motion? Okay, seeing none, as I often do when I don't see any comments, emotion, or discussion, I'm just going to jump in there and see what happens. As you can see from the staff report, the policy committee spent a lot of time in working through these questions, and which have been very much informed by the work of the Planning Commission and the work of those who participated in our affordable housing discussion the other night. Thank you very much. Just in working in trying to get housing in the town in the 8 years I've been on the council, it's a difficult task, as many of you know, and we don't build it ourselves. And we do have a program where we try to, as much as we can possibly do so, encourage it. So what I am not saying by any stretch that what is being proposed tonight is perfect. I'm not saying that it means that all of a sudden the demographics of Los Gatos will change, but I am saying that it is a positive step in the right direction that could be followed by other positive steps in the right direction. And with the General Plan Advisory Committee adopting the alternative that it did, anticipating 2,000 units from our regional housing needs assessment, and then planning for that by allowing denser units in particular areas of town, changing some ideas of where single family residential zoning is appropriate, or multi-unit housing is appropriate, or mixed use is appropriate. By putting all of those pieces together, then we get toward producing that housing that we need and that we want. It's also a question of changing and convincing, changing attitudes and convincing people that an inclusive, diverse community is a valuable community and one that they should work toward. That's another issue that we have to confront. But if we can take a program, existing program that we have, and use it to create more units, use it to create both housing and rental units, use it to make these units available to more people. And I dare say that $100,000, $130,000 combined income is not a heck of a lot in Los Gatos. And to make those units available, and frankly, for those units that we've actually managed to produce, hopefully on Ditto's Lane, and use those income levels for those teachers or those essential workers that we want to be able to house. This is a really good step in the right direction. I anticipate and hope that the town will be taking further steps, but given that I do believe the policy committee worked really hard, the planning commission worked really hard, and our community has come forward with great ideas that are definitely not precluded by an adoption of this plan, that I would like to go forward and make the motion that we do adopt those, the recommended amendments to both Chapter 29 of our zoning regulations of the town code regarding the below market price housing guidelines, and we adopt modifications in the resolution that's at attachment 3 to our housing guidelines, which are primarily administrative on how we administer this program. So given that I do want to produce housing, I recognize that this is a first step and that it's first of many. My motion is then to approve the recommended amendments. So we'll see if I get anybody to go with me on that. It's like kind of like the North 40 deja vu.
A question first.
Yes, Councilwoman Zach.
One of the suggestions to try to, one of the suggestions from the Planning Commission, I believe it was Matthew Hudis who provided it, was for extra points to be given for those in the very low and extremely low. Is that something that is possible to do? I know that we're looking at production on the one hand and then how it's actually administered in another.
So as the maker of the motion, I'm going to answer that question as I understand it based on my motion. And if I'm incorrect, somebody please let me know. It's my understanding that if we are to change the points for very low with respect to developers or what we're looking for, we are looking at a nexus study. Am I correct, Mr. Paulson?
I'm looking more at administration, not production, but just the administration of who gets the actual housing once it's built.
So maybe, thank you, Mr. Paulson.
Sorry, Mayor. So
no, go ahead.
Modifying the guidelines for the program would not require a nexus study. If you want to add opportunities for additional points for applicants, it doesn't change the production requirement for the developer. So I don't believe that would require a nexus study.
Okay.
And is it possible to bifurcate the two so that understanding that production is something we want to increase and rate, and if there's an ability now to go to that 120, but on the other hand, giving priority points to those with extremely low and very low is something we can also add on. Can we do that? It doesn't have to be consistent across both sides, does it?
It does not. So you could do, I mean, the point system frankly applies to the for sale units. There is not a point system for the rental units. The rental units, it's strictly based on income, and then the property manager or property owner handles the selection of those tenants. The for sale is where the point system comes into play.
Okay.
So right now, currently, we do have, just for your information, we do have in the rental portion that priority will be given to those households whose income is less than 50% of the median income, which would be down into the very low rates.
Okay.
Into the very low.
So Councilwoman Stack, if it would make a difference to you to include in the guidelines for applicants for, what was it?
For sale.
For sale units, additional points for income category, and that does not require a nexus study, I'd be willing to consider that as a friendly amendment to my motion.
Okay, and one last question of staff. When production is created, do most and it's for affordable housing, do they already know upfront at what income level that affordable housing unit would be if it's for rental?
So every year the rental rates are published towards the beginning of the year based on the size of the unit, and basically not square footage, but from a number of bedrooms perspective. So that changes each year. So depending on the process, it can fluctuate. It doesn't fluctuate greatly though.
And so changing by adding our BMP guidelines to 120, that doesn't affect the rental rates then?
It does not, because we're still requiring them to provide the rent at the 80% level, even though the pool's getting larger because you're allowing more people with higher income to qualify.
And then, so if I'm understanding this correctly, then raising it to 120 could help increase housing production. And yes, on the distribution side for housing, it may increase the pool, but we have an ability to mitigate that by adding criteria and extra points. So am I understanding this conversation correctly?
I wouldn't say it directly leads to different production. The production is really set in the ordinance as far as the number of units that are required, and we're not modifying that at this point. That was a suggestion that has come up, and if that's something the council is interested in, that for sure would need an nexus study. And so we would be looking for direction either from this council or future councils to get proposals for that, bring them before council and see if that's something they want to prioritize fund.
Okay. So based on the information that was just answered, I'm comfortable seconding the motion. With a
Okay.
friendly amendment, please.
Okay, I was going to ask you. All right. Councilman Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm sorry I didn't have the opportunity of discussing this at Policy Committee, and I'm still trying to understand what I might be voting for here. If I could go to page 12 of 26, it talks about changing. It's the determination of initial selling price for a BMP. So we're talking about a sold unit. It changes the language from no greater than from 80 to no greater than, it changes from 100 to 120. Does that affect the price of the house, or does that just affect who can be in the house?
It would slightly affect the price of the house, yes.
So
the initial sales price.
What I'm trying to, what this feels like is a giveaway in dollars to the developer. And the reason that feels that way is somebody comes in and says, I've got a lot and I want to put 20 houses on it. And we say, well, 20 houses, you got to build 20% below market. So 4 of those have to be below market. So they were normally going to have to provide 4 units. And now we're saying, instead of, and we said half of those have to be moderate and half at the low income level, right? And now we're changing the moderate to be above moderate, basically moderate to above moderate. And so if somebody comes in and buys it at the above moderate level, we haven't gotten any more houses, but the developer's gotten more money.
So one clarification, our current 100% is, and this is really, again, there's a lot of, technical nuances here, but our current 100% is considered median. Moderate in the state, and I believe federal as well, is up to 120. So they are still affordable units at moderate. Over 120 is considered to be market rate or above moderate housing. So, but you are correct. It is lessening the gap that the developer has to make up, because he's potentially going to get a little bit more in the sales price than he would have at 100%. That is correct.
And so our thinking then is to pencil out the 20 units he wants to build and the profit and what it's going to cost him, we've just added a little more profit to his bottom line to make it more worthwhile for him to build the 20 units. Is that what we're thinking here?
Well, I don't want to guess what folks are thinking, but
this is what I'm trying to understand and maybe buy into the line.
Well, as the maker of the motion, I'll help you out. I did indicate in my remarks that my goal is to produce housing. Because the town is not producing housing, I am going to have to rely on a developer, whether that be a nonprofit or a for-profit developer. If that developer is not incentivized to build housing, I'm getting exactly 0 units. If I raise this to 120%, perhaps I get more production of housing from the nonprofit or for-profit developer, and I do make those units that are produced more accessible to a wider variety of people, all of whom's income is well below what would normally be required to buy a market rate house in Los Gatos.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I'm reluctant, but I think I may support your motion. I would ask maybe one more potential amendment in the ownership, and I can't find it in the pages. We talked about changing the shall to should. Be ownership also BMPs. Can we remove that so that it isn't encouraged? If somebody wanted to make them rentals, they could, or make some wording changes.
So the current language is on 3 of 26, and we're changing shall to should to provide a little more flexibility. So it's not the mandatory. It's something that the developer could propose as they come through the process, and provides flexibility to both the Planning Commission and Council should they determine that's appropriate for that project in particular.
And my comment is I'm questioning whether should is now really doing much more encouraging of them to be rental, if that's really our goal.
Mr. Paulson, Mr. Redney, are you proposing that as an amendment to my motion?
Yes.
Okay, before I make a decision on that, it's my understanding that the should is we're not precluding anything, but we are being more flexible in the goal of producing housing by saying should rather than saying, okay, we're demanding X, Y, Z. And if my goal is to produce that housing, is the idea that we are providing flexibility for whoever may end up developing that housing?
That's correct.
Is that the theory?
That's correct. The current language is shall, so you don't have any flexibility. Although these are guidelines, so the council could hopefully make that determination. But the shall is generally mandatory. The should provides additional flexibility.
Okay, Councilman Wren, at the risk of losing your vote, and hopefully I won't, I think flexibility in this situation is good. We want to be able to produce that housing. So I would like to keep it as a more flexible, relying on future planning commissions and councils to make sure that we get the housing that we need. And we'll see how you vote. Vice Mayor.
Madam Mayor, this is interesting. I mean, I've always been proud of Los Gatos because we started our BMP program in 1970s. And some of the cities in Santa Clara County don't even have one yet. So I'm proud of us. I think what we've done is great. I also think it's very interesting this evening. The four of us don't have an exact meeting of the minds on what we want, whether we support the motion, whether we don't. But we're alike in the sense that in one form or another, we want to create more below market price units for more individuals. Now, when I heard listen to the people at the community meeting, I was convinced that we shouldn't go up to 120%. But if that's what it takes today to approve a motion that makes what we have better, I'm willing to support it. I thought Ms. Sayak's amendment was very well taken, and I appreciate it. I look, however, at Mr. Paulson's numbers here, and if you have 135,900, that means you could have two people earning 65,000, or the 89,750 could have two people earning 45,000. I would really like, ideally, to push those numbers down and not have them at 135,900. But having said that, what we're doing is balancing between something that's better versus something else that's better. So I will be supporting your motion.
Any other comments on the motion before I call the question? Councilwoman Sayak.
And I wanted to go to a comment that Councilmember Rennie had about, and I'm looking at page 3 of 26, that word should, understanding the flexibility that is behind it. And I'm just wondering if it's, I like the idea of flexibility, but I do also see Councilmember Rennie's point of should seems to be an encouragement of one way. Does staff have any so my question is, are there any recommendations to even soften it even more so that we can come to agreement on what, it sounds like we want flexibility, we want to give the developer the option without guiding them towards one. And so does staff understand, should it really, is that conveyed to applicants?
So for us, that is clear. We could soften the language a little bit more. On the fly, off the top of my head, maybe you start that paragraph out with generally, comma, or typically, comma. And so you've got the typically they should, generally they should. It's softening the language somewhat, but ultimately developers are going to look at the ordinance. They're probably not even going to look at the guidelines. So we're going to have that dialogue from a staff perspective with them anyway, as we get them moving through the process and making them aware of these various options or opportunities.
And so the question then for you as the director, we want to make sure that this is understood and documented. Would that be contained in some internal document so that all of your staff, regardless of turnover, understands that what we as a council are trying to convey with that flexibility?
So from a staff perspective, the should's enough for us. But ultimately, I think it's been said by multiple council members, this is kind of this, most recent bite at the apple, and we're going to have to do a lot more work moving forward on this topic in general, and then figuring out how we kind of get the social equity portions potentially in the guidelines as well. So I envision that next year we probably will be having further conversations of some other refinements and tweaks to improve these guidelines even more.
Okay, thank you for that answer.
Okay, Council, and Mr. Rennie.
Yeah, just to beat this horse a little bit more. Right now, it says BMP dwellings within a project of rental units should also be rental units. Next sentence, BMP, this is what it could say, BMP units within a project of owner-occupied units may also be designated units for purchase or for rental. You could, that would, and you could even add at the developer's discretion to the end of that sentence.
There's definitely more than one way to try to add some more flexibility.
All right, thanks. I won't beat it anymore.
Okay, Council, are we ready to take a vote on this motion? All right. Councilwoman Sayoc.
Yes.
Vice Mayor.
Yes.
Councilman Rennie.
Yes.
And the mayor votes yes. It passes unanimously with the friendly amendment from Councilwoman Sayoc. Thank you very much for a productive discussion, Council. We will move on to item 8.
First, I have to read the.
Oh, you got to read it. Sorry.
An ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos amending Chapter 29 zoning regulations of the Town Code regarding the below market price program.
Thank you very much. Okay. With that, are we ready to move on to number 8 on our agenda this evening? This is a continuing discussion of economic recovery in the Town of Los Gatos, focused on parklets, K-rails, et cetera, et cetera. And so presenting our staff report this evening will be Monica Wren. Monica.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Before I begin tonight, I do want to take us back to May when all of you had a special meeting and vetted a series of options for our businesses to provide them with opportunities to find a way out of the wild economic times that we were experiencing through the pandemic. And as I was out and as our staff group was out over the summer and we were doing our work, I just want to share with you the gratitude and the appreciation that all of the business community has for the work and the swift action that you all took back in May. So before we began tonight, I just wanted to make sure that you knew that there is truly an appreciation and there's truly an awareness of the steps that you've taken to support our community thus far. And then with that, I have a PowerPoint presentation that I think is coming up. Great, thank you. You can move forward to the next page. Perfect. So briefly tonight, I just want to walk us through some of the pieces of the discussion this evening. There's a lot of parklets that we're going to talk about. So I want to kind of just form some vocabulary around how we're going to have this discussion. And then at the end, I've laid out some of the options for you. I'll move really quickly through this. And please, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me. So starting with our pilot program, our pilot parklet program that was adopted back in February of 2019. This was one that the council adopted as a public-private partnership with businesses. They can move forward with constructing a parklet, a semi-permanent parklet on our roadways. And these were for their exclusive use during their service hours if they served alcohol, and then they were open to the public outside of business hours. At the time, we had anticipated that these would take place or be in place for about 3 years. And then moving on to May, we were looking at the next slide, please. the K-Rail Parklet program. And this was a part of that economic recovery resolution that was adopted. And this is where we brought back the K-Rail and we provided outdoor space for businesses to use for either seating, for retail, for personal service, whatever they needed to make some adaptations so that their business could continue to operate through the pandemic. Equally, we enacted some options for those who aren't in downtown and don't have that public space on the street. So on the next slide, we briefly highlight some of those other things that were brought into place. And that was allowing businesses and shopping centers to reduce their parking requirements so that they too could have outdoor seating, outdoor service areas. The resolution also allowed for some reduced fees with CUPs, with the town absorbing half of the cost of CUPs for many of our businesses. And really we were focused on number one, retaining those businesses that we have. And then number two, attracting businesses, because we do know that through the pandemic, there have been some business models that are thriving. There are people still looking to open businesses. So I am happy to report that we've seen both. We've seen retention and we've seen some attraction take place. And then through all of the economic recovery agreements and through all of the parklets and the parking and just the different nuances, what's really been a silver lining has been the increased individualized assistance. So through this process, I've been able to connect one-on-one with a lot of our business owners, a lot of our property owners, get to know them, get to know their stories, and then really help them apply the economic recovery in a way that fits their business model. So finally tonight, the next two slides kind of outline the discussion. I don't need to walk through them now for you in the interest of time, but basically what they do is they walk through a report and they pull out those questions that we have that were kind of embedded within the recommendation. So the hope here is that it kind of helps guide the conversation through tonight for the council. And then we can always circle back or we can add or change anything that you all want to discuss as well. That concludes my report and I'm here for any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wren. Are there any preliminary questions for Ms. Wren before we hear from members of the public? Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to ask this just to prompt any comments from the public also. In part of our staff report, we're talking about buying planters and providing sort of these parklets long term. We're talking about effectively allowing parklets that the users haven't had to pay for. And so the first concern I have is we've had, we started this parklet program where we've had some businesses and property owners go in and spend a lot of money to build a nice parklet. And so I'm worried about the fairness of somebody spent $150,000 to build a parklet, and then we give the guy next door one for free. Currently, it's really short term, but if we make this even any longer term or we're buying planters for them, have you heard any concerns from those that have been shelling out the big bucks about us kind of giving space for any period of time? We're certainly short term, I think everybody's supportive, but have you heard any worries about this fairness issue that I'm trying to explain?
No, I understand what you're asking. I have not heard direct concerns about it. I think what I've heard more is that there are a lot of people who would really love to have these more built out parklets, but the budget just doesn't allow it right now. And that's where the recommendation for a possible grant came in as a kind of a middle road. One of the unique things about the parklet program in the beginning was that we didn't have a lot of rules around how big it could be. We didn't have rules about it being in front of another restaurant. It was first come, first serve. So if I came to the table and I wanted 2 to 3 spaces and it spilled over in front of a restaurant, it was okay. At this point, staff is really recommending that we don't allow those to be built in front of someone else's restaurant unless that person is part of the conversation, because we're in an economic time where we really need the outdoor space. We don't know what the future holds for indoor. And even if the businesses can go to 25% occupancy in a couple weeks, we know that 25% occupancy doesn't allow them to pay their rent. And we know that through the conversations we've had about seating. And so I think that at this point, even that
that pilot program is a little bit more modified than it was in the beginning, when it was more of, if you come to the table and you have the means to build it and you have the means to maintain it, we were more accepting of it.
Okay, thank you.
Question?
Enough. I'll see if any members of the public also comment.
Any other questions from members of the council before I call on the public? I don't see anyone. So again, if you'd like to participate, we don't engage in a dialogue. We take your testimony. We might have questions for you. Use the function on your Zoom or your phone, #9, to indicate that you'd like to speak. And so as I see hands raised, I will call on the speakers. Sue Farwell. And when I do call on you, just unmute yourself and start talking. If we can't hear you, we'll let you know.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now
Can you
we
hear
can.
me? Okay,
There
all
we
right,
go.
fantastic. I'm going to speak just briefly kind of to the temporary parklet issue you guys have it on, on the table. And I understand the decision of the council a year ago to make the parklets temporary. It was a new look, it was a new idea, and you wanted to make sure there was a way out if necessary. Back when you passed the parklet ordinance, there was already a clear need for outdoor dining. Neighboring communities already had outdoor dining and were clearly more vibrant, busier, and thriving. We needed to be on the level playing field and compete for great retail and great restaurants. And honestly, the downtown needed some revitalization. I always felt that once you saw the design and function of the temporary parklets, you would embrace the long-term need for them. I think they look great. Of course, I'm biased since I, along with my tenants, Terry, Andrea, Anna, and Stefan, designed the parklets. The function and the different personalities given to the parklets with the different tables, chair designs, different umbrella and shade canopies, various colors, all give a great look to the downtown. As Rob Rennie pointed out, please remember these parklets are not temporary from the price standpoint. The design requirements are $60,000 to $100,000 to build, and you still need to outfit them with tables, chairs, shade coverings, heating, etc. I truly felt that the risk to build the temporary parklet at that price for 1 year to 3 years was pretty steep, but I also truly believe that you would see the benefit of the parklets and extend the use to permanent until there's a major infrastructure change downtown. Now more than ever, you need to make these temporary parklets permanent. Now is the time to embrace the proactive and protective approach for all our businesses in Los Gatos. The option for parklet dining should be extended to all of Los Gatos where appropriate, and you need to continue the K-rail to fully operate until we are over 100% post-COVID. I commend the council for being proactive previously, approving the temporary parklet program, and I know the council will see the need tonight to be proactive and approve the parklets as permanent. Couple comments for Rob Rennie and for anyone else that is considering this. We built the parklets. They're quite expensive. I feel no ill will for having the K-rail. I think that is essential. I think that all the town businesses have taken the, all for one and one for all attitude. And that if we can all survive this and get post-COVID, then it's time for the K-rolls to go away and it's time for people to step up. And if there's a grant program, it'd be great. We need more of the temporary parklets throughout town. One thing is to consider is if there is a grant program, perhaps there's a way to retroactively help out those that step forward and we're willing to take the risk and spend that money and show the town how important the parklets are. And as you can see now with the COVID, it's critical. So that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Farwell. Are there any questions for the speaker? Seeing none, the next hand I see up is Matthew Hudis.
Thank you, Mayor Jensen and council members. I'm going to address my remarks mostly to the last part of the statement that says provide direction on pilot parklet program and economic recovery initiatives. And so I want to, obviously Ms. Farwell and others are going to be much more expert in terms of the specific questions on K-rails and temporary parklet, but I wanted to address really the economic survival post-pandemic so that we actually thrive on the other side. And we need to do more than K-rails. And so my suggestion are 6 points. One is immediately reallocate the balance of the 1.9 million from the beautification budget to recovery for small businesses. Find at least 3 million from other projects that do not need to move as quickly, creating a $5 million revitalization fund, not to be used or given to individual businesses, but to be used for projects, not just downtown, but across the whole town. And number 2, explore some new funding sources via public-private partnerships, state and federal programs. And then number 3, stand up an economic revitalization board with the best retail, financial, and entrepreneurial minds in the town. This board could make recommendations of less than 100,000 to the town manager and more than 100,000 to the council for approval by the council. This will create transparency and encourage community input. The 4th thing is to accelerate parking improvements of the Dixon report. Motorists need to be directed to available parking, and we could start with just better physical signs while moving to electronic wayfinding. As the restaurants are recovering due to parklets and other things, the removal of parking is putting additional pressure on retail that's already struggling. The 5th is to develop a new configuration for North Santa Cruz, looking at best practice across the US, across the world, to allow maximum outdoor seating that's complementary and compatible with retail, and work toward a goal of really a best downtown. And then finally, make Los Gatos easy to do business with. It's not just about the fees, it's more about speed, handoffs between departments, and we need to measure the times for permitting in order to improve. So those are some suggestions that go beyond just the downtown parklet area.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Huditz? Seeing none. Maria Ristow.
Oh, sorry, I must be logged into the wrong Zoom account. It's Randy.
You are not Maria Ristow. You are Randy Chen.
I know. I'm sorry. I must have the wrong Zoom account in. I'm sorry. It's Randy Chen from the Chamber. Good evening, council members. Thank you all for your support of our businesses during this time. As you've heard other speakers say, we believe that we should keep our K-rails at least through March 31st, 2021, if not longer. Now that we have outdoor dining, it is loved by both diners and restaurants alike. It has enlivened Los Gatos and made downtown the place to be. We cannot go back. However, that said, we should not make any permanent decisions on the K-rails now until we see how the pandemic plays out. The K-rails are working and they are an inexpensive solution. Putting money into planters or a more expensive solution when the future is so uncertain seems premature. We do believe that all the K-rail parklets should have floors that even them with the sidewalks, and we should address what type of roof construction is allowed. I also agree with extending the sort of semi-permanent parklets to the 5 to 7 year plan, which I believe the staff recommended, and I think the grant program would also be great. So what else could the town do to help our businesses across the board? One solution would be to forgive business licenses for businesses who meet certain parameters. For example, in San Jose, in an effort to relieve small business suffering during the pandemic, the city council unanimously agreed to expand a tax break to businesses who bring in less than $25,000 in revenue. In San Jose's case, it will cost the city $1 million. In our case, that number would be significantly less. Even though business licenses are not very costly in Los Gatos. Right now, that few $100s can make a huge difference to our small businesses who are struggling as a result of the pandemic. And lastly, I'd like to thank you for funding our Los Gatos and Lights. We believe this will bring people to town to shop, dine, and visit, and instill a sense of pride in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chen. Any questions for Ms. Chen? Okay, I don't see any. Donna Novi.
Oh, good evening, Council. This is Donna Novi from the Pastaria in Los Gatos, of course. I just wanted to thank everybody first for the lovely K-rail that we've been able to use as a parklet. It has enabled us to have an outdoor dining room, and the outdoor dining has been a necessary and delightful piece in the steps to recovery. Not only have they boosted the morale for our employees, for the few that we've been able to bring back and get them on the payroll, but they have given the town a much needed respite and uplift. The outdoor dining has improved the vitality of our town, and I hope that you please consider extending the lease on the K-rail parklets for the fall to the fall of 2021. I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but we all understand we'll never make up for the nearly 7 months of lost income, but being open indoor will be an added, if we have the added addition of outdoor dining, it could really help a lot of us. And I just want to thank you once again for the outdoor dining lifeline that you threw to us. We were able to make it our own and make it pretty, and wasn't the prettiest thing to start off with, but we're really pleased with it now. We get a lot of really great feedback from our customers and people from other outlying towns like Campbell and Saratoga. They really seem to enjoy our, our outdoor dining scene, and they feel like they're in Europe. So thank you again for that.
Thank you, Ms. Novi. Questions for the speaker? I don't see any. All right. David McGregor Scholes, who appears as Redemption California. I'm assuming that's who this is.
Yes, that is I. So I'm actually Donna's neighbour at Redemption. We're right next door to Donna, and the work she has done on her parklet should stand alone as a reason to not take them down. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's just the painting and the flowers and the lights. It just looks like something that should be permanently there, in my opinion. So I'm just going to echo everyone that's gone before me in saying that this is an absolute vital inclusion to the town, and it should be the start of something that is only built upon. As far as parking goes, it seems that it really hasn't been an issue over this summer. I know with the COVID sort of situation, it's changed it, but if this is the kind of the new norm for Los Gatos, having the outdoor and having the parklets, it does seem to make sense that we can build on this and make it a more permanent situation, and people might forget about the parking, and they might just actually, realize that the downtown and the vibrancy is worth trying to look for a parking spot. That seems to be what I've noticed over this period. So, and like Donna said, Campbell is actually following Los Gatos' lead for this time. They've changed their situation to having parklets as well. So, and just also we've been recently down in Santa Cruz and kind of seeing that it's not even up to the standard that Los Gatos has as far as their parklets go. So you guys are doing very well and kind of leading the way in the area. So anything that can be built on and to keep going with this and keep it as long as possible and just keep building on it, I think is going to be vital for keeping people coming downtown and supporting the businesses. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for the speaker? I don't see any. Catherine Summers.
Hi, good evening, Council. Kind of want to reiterate a few things that other people said. First of all, I wanted to pick up on something that Sue Farwell said, which was one for all for one. And we're kind of all in this together. And I think those K-rails, believe it or not, did sort of bring everybody together. So the ones who have the really formal parklets are very accepting of their neighbors who have the K-rails. And for that reason, I think they, along with everybody else, wants to see those K-rails there. Really, I don't even really think you should think about that. I think they're there. They should be there until until we're out of this pandemic that we're in right now. However, saying that, I think that we really should look at the months that are right ahead of us and the rainy season. And I do think that some flooring, and I think this is what you should discuss tonight, is how do we make sure that we have flooring in all of them? And maybe that is some subsidy that the town helps every one of the restaurants that needs to do that, so that the water travels underneath, so that they are, so that there's no liability that the town undertakes. So I think you should look at some of those things tonight. And then I also think, looking ahead, you constantly have to ask yourself, what problem are you trying to solve? We're trying to get people to come downtown, really, and to shop and dine. And I don't think anything is really a fast fix. So I think, again, and I've said this before in a few council meetings, we have to look at the holistic, or look at all of this holistically, comprehensively. And I really think at some point it's time, and maybe we use some of the economic recovery dollars, to have a planner come in and take just one block. And what could we do on that one block that would increase the sidewalk capacity, be it taking out the planters or whatever it is. I just think there's ways of doing it. And maybe it's not parklets down the whole street. And maybe we still do have parking on North Santa Cruz. But I don't think any of us can answer that question. I do think it's going to take a professional consultant to come in and look at it and figure out what's best 5, 8 years, 10 years down the road of what we're aiming toward. Let's just not slap money out there until we really look at what we want eventually. So that would be my 2 cents. Thanks.
Okay, questions for Ms. Summers? I don't see anyone. I don't see anyone else with their hands raised. I'll give it a second. Okay, seeing no one else, I'm going to close the public portion of the hearing and look to the council for questions. Mr. Rennie, you're the first hand I see.
Thank you, Mayor. Of course, I have questions. Let me start off with a few. Not really relevant here, but the Dixon, but related. The Dixon parking report was mentioned. Are we moving forward with that at all? I understand, clearly it's not as pressing at the moment. I know that the one of the lots that's the busiest is the one in front of the chamber there next to Blue Line Pizza. And I can go in that lot any time of day and it's not full, which is not the way it used to be. So I know we're not pressed for parking, but I'm curious, are we moving forward with any of those ideas, or are they completely on hold?
Yes, we are proceeding apace. We've hired a temporary employee to help us implement the parking study, since it is one of the council's strategic priorities. We're focusing on the 2 highest priorities that the council identified when it accepted the study. One is the wayfinding to the parking, and the second is dealing with employee parking in the downtown. So yes, that work is underway.
Okay. Thank you. My next question is, I'm kind of in favor of picking up K-Rail that's not being used. And, I've watched the whole street, and the only place that really looks like it's not being used is the K-Rails in front of Soul Cycle. And I know the owner of Dolce Spazio has asked me to pick them up so there'd be more parking in the area. That would be the reason to not just leave them everywhere. Let's make sure they're being used. And so probably a question for Monica then, are they planning to use that space, or can we pick those up?
So tonight was actually the first night when I drove through town that I saw families in there eating frozen yogurt. But for the most part, they are unused. And we actually have 2 examples of unused. We have that one, and then we have one other that's actually been adopted or under agreement with the business. However, the business is not allowed to be open by the public health order yet. So theirs remains unused too. The question, and before you, when we look at these unused, or I guess unhosted parklets, is that we need to provide ADA or some sort of platform. We need to make them accessible for everybody. So if we leave them in place, we would need to commit to accessibility and maintenance of those, or we could pick them up and add parking. And that's certainly something that council can provide direction on tonight. And if you'd like to see that parking be the 30-minute quick turn parking, or if you'd like to see it return to what it was prior, which I believe was 2 hours. So we have a couple of options there. And as you actually walk through the options tonight, we can put the slides back up. It's buried in the options with the K-rail.
And a second part of that is, how expensive is it to just pick up a few at a time, like for this example?
So this is definitely a question that Matt may want to weigh in on after I answer. But basically, we have this block of K-rail that we have rented. We're paying this rental fee, and then he does have staff that can come out and make small adjustments. It's really a timing. We try to make, I think we've done 6 or 7 iterations at this point of moving and shifting K-rail. We try to keep a list of kind of immediate needs, and we address 2 or 3 at once to use his staff's time efficiently. But I can let Matt weigh in if he has more information on that.
Thank you. I'm Matt Morley, Director of Parks and Public Works. The cost to remove it is just the cost of loading it on a tractor trailer and shipping it back to Hollister, where it came from. The total cost for all of the K-rail to remove that is about $10,000. So it would be some increment of that, a little bit more expensive if we do sort of a onesie-twosie versus all at once, but certainly something that we can continue to do. And we're trying to keep a balance between having a little bit of K-rail on hand so that we can do some adjustment and not having too much. So there is a little bit of flexibility there. And
I'm really, whether you pick it up and put it in your corporate yard or ship it back to Hollister is not really what I'm worried about. It's I'm trying to make sure we have parking available and have the parking spaces are valuable spaces, and they're going to get more valuable as we come out of COVID, further and further out of COVID. So we want to make sure we're using them the most appropriately. If they're being used, that's great. If they're not, then I would think that we would want the parking. And so I'm trying to, I don't want to say pick them up if it's expensive just to pick them up and ship them off, and then we might need them back or something like that. That's what I'm just trying to understand, if it's not really a big deal to take them. And
picking them up and moving them off of the street or over down to the yard is straightforward and easy.
Okay. Next question.
How many questions do you have, Mr. Rennie, so we can figure out?
I had 1 or 2 more.
Okay.
On the grant, you talk about grant matching, or no, you said grants. I was wondering if that's a full grant, or are we going to ask them for a match? What's the structure of your grant?
This would really be up to the council to decide. What I was envisioning was whatever the portion of the money that we would be using to rent K-rail or to pay for something else, you could look at providing a business some chunk, 10,000, I don't know what that number is, whatever you're comfortable with, and then incentivizing it. So one thing that we didn't consider when we started this, and I think Ms. Farwell touched on it a little bit, is she got her businesses together to kind of build one that they can shift around and share. And so looking at grants where instead of just one business in a row builds 3 different ones, maybe there's an incentive if the 3 of them work together, there's one structure that's then split. And so that was kind of the idea floating out there for the council to consider and look at how you think best fits.
So the question really is this a grant for us to do it all for them, or just to pay for part of it? That's really what I'm trying to understand.
The recommendation or the thought was part of it, but I think if there's, if it's the council's prerogative, if you wanted to provide more than portion, that's something that you could certainly do.
And then one last question, if I could, Mayor, is on the planters. It's $500,000 for planters. I'm trying to figure out, is there some in-between option where maybe we don't need to buy that many planters? Again, I'm thinking as the county opens up more, there may be less use. Hair salons may not need to be in the street anymore. Nail salons may not need to be in the street anymore. And I'm envisioning there may be a reduction of the parklets as we go. But restaurants are going to want to keep them a long time. But I hate to spend $500,000 and we ended up opening up and not using a bunch of them, especially since it takes several months to get them. By the time we get them, we may not already need 25%. Can you add any thoughts on that?
Sure. Thank you for that question. That's actually a great point. So the 500,000 was what we looked at in the beginning back in May when we were considering doing all planters. And even as we talk now, I'm hearing from some retailers that, maybe they don't need them anymore. The council could definitely craft a program where you designate certain areas, or maybe it's a restaurant program, and then we provide some other sort of option for retail. It's really could be tailored however you want it. And I think, and Matt can correct me again if I'm wrong, we could do it incrementally. So we could look at maybe replacing one block, see how that works, see if there's, see if we need that many. I think 500, if I'm correct, was like an umbrella max of what we thought it would be. Matt, do you have other thoughts?
Yeah, so the 500 is sort of aligns with the amount of K-rail that we have now. So it would be a 1-for-1 replacement. So anything less than that would certainly be less of an investment. This might tie nicely to the longevity of these temporary parklets and what that looks like. So if you're inclined to leave them longer, maybe a more of an investment in what they look like would make more sense. If you're inclined to have a shorter outlook on those, then maybe not so much. The businesses they've really stepped up. They've done a nice job themselves of making the most of the parklets with doing some plantings and making them their own. So there's been some softening of the K-rail already.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I will. I suspect you have an organization you want to follow, so I will end my questions here.
My organization right now is to get people's questions answered. So, Council, are there other questions before Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't need the.
Right. Can we remove that slide for the time being?
Discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
In the staff report today and in our written staff report, a lot of issues were raised. And so the way I went through my analysis is I made a list for myself of things that I think are, for me, givens, if they really need to be done. And then I had a list of some that were more like variables. On my list of givens, we are now, in the fall. We are heading toward the holiday season. Holiday season, we all know, is the most important for especially our retail. Our holiday season may be different this year, but it still nevertheless is the most important time of year for retail. So with that in mind, I believe that whatever we do, we need to take steps that will support our retail. We need to benefit not only downtown, Santa Cruz Avenue, Main Street, but whatever we do to benefit retail and our businesses needs to be go throughout the town. I believe that we should remove any non-used parklets. If I walk around downtown, which I do, I can see which ones aren't being used by the businesses, by the restaurants, and which ones are. The ones that aren't being used, I would remove them because that gives more access to our retail. I would, and this one for me is a given. The only issue is who. For the parklets that remain, and I'm talking about the ones that, the K-rail ones, they must be code compliant, ADA, drainage, structure, heater, etc. I don't have in my own mind a firm concept of who does what, but it needs to be done, and it needs to be done basically immediately. And I would not have pop-ups in the sense that I don't want more businesses competing with our existing businesses. By way of example, if somebody thinks a coffee pop-up is good in their store, in their parklet, then I would do somebody's local coffee roasting company, Great Bear, something like that. So those are the concepts that I feel comfortable with. The one that I haven't put my arms around yet is the issue of timing. There are so many variables, most of which we don't control. We now know, as of yesterday, we now know that restaurants may be able to open up 25% inside as of next week, but something could go wrong and maybe they can't. But right now, that's the reality. We know that if that happens, it may close down. So timing, in my mind, I'm actually looking for guidance from the other council members, the staff. So timing is an issue, but the one thing that seemed reasonable to me is to have some date or time frame that everything would be reviewed again. I think this was in the staff report. March of 2021 just seemed like a good time to revisit these issues. And lastly, I like the idea of Mr. Hudes, where he was talking about a group of residents, businesses that get together and formally analyze all this myriad of issues that we have to deal with in our town, especially with regard to financial help for our businesses, and where that money's going to come from and how that whole thing is going to proceed and what it's going to look like. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. That was definitely not a question. So that means that I'm going to go to other council members. I was hoping that we could actually go through not the slide that was up from Ms. Brennan, although it was helpful, some of the questions that are posed in the staff report, but since we've gone down a different track here, I'll call on Councilwoman Sea.
Thank you. I do have a question of staff with regard to the overhead coverage. Could you, I'm having a hard time visualizing what exactly maybe some businesses have suggested. What you have here, prefabricated corrugated awning covers. I'm not quite sure what that looks like and how stable these structures are. So do you have any sense of what people are proposing?
Well, since the report, I actually have been working with the fire department because part of the discussion is that we have a building code, we have a fire code, we have folks using pop-ups. So, and then we had the issue come through where people have been using the fabric sails and they want something a little harder that resists water. There is like a fiberglass, sometimes it's tin and it's kind of wavy. It's a big sheet that you can bolt to posts. And that's what I think the question was. It was specifically the corrugated patio cover. But I think in general, what our businesses are looking for is, do we have guidelines? There are so many things out there. I think at first we thought maybe this was very short term, so we just kind of let our businesses take the lead. But now that we know it's longer term, now that we understand we have businesses next to each other where rain runoff could be coming in to guests, we're really looking for some guidance. And I think the holding line really is fire and the building code. So understanding that what we have is safe. And then that's where the conversation of heaters gets layered in there.
Sure.
So I think businesses are looking for something rain resistant and then also looking for a way to keep guests comfortable.
Okay, but there's nothing that we can look at to say yes, no, yes, no. It's more of the concept, like with the concept of yes, work with the businesses to provide some kind of coverage as long as it meets building code, fire code, and doesn't create additional runoff. Would that be sufficient guidance for staff?
Sure, I think, and I guess I'm sorry I didn't really lay this out clear enough. I think part of the question is does the town want to invest in something where, let's say there's 3 restaurants in a row or 3 parklets in a row, including a retail, and we do some sort of structure, or we offer some sort of assistance where there's one structure that goes the whole span of that parklet. Does that make sense to the council? Does it make more sense that each business comes in individually and we say, okay, you're allowed to either use an umbrella or a 10 by 10 pop-up with the fire code rating? So I guess what we're kind of looking to you is there an investment we want to make to provide this weatherproofing? Are there ideas about the look of it? Should it be the same? Should it be something that we work with folks on? Or should we create 1 or 2 menu items that they can choose from?
I see. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. And that was
Did
really
you-
the only question. Actually, no, I take that back. I have a second question. And it might be more for the town attorney. So there's a lot of discussion on ADA. Because these are public streets, that responsibility really is on the town, isn't it?
So each K-Rail parklet, they're required to sign indemnification and have insurance. But if something was to happen, either because of, you know, illegal heaters and there was a fire, or because of an ADA issue, we certainly would also be sued, and we would hope that the indemnification and insurance would hold up. So that's my main concern, is that, you know, and when it began in March, I don't think any envisioned we'd be sitting here in October still discussing it and continuing until March. So my push, and as Vice Mayor Spector said, is to get them in compliance. And some of them have. I mean, I would actually say probably a majority have built structures to meet ADA requirements. So I certainly, from my standpoint, because that will alleviate a lot of our exposure, because like you said, they are public streets.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Further questions?
Did you want to, since you have the floor, Councilwoman Sayoc,
Sure.
the Vice Mayor went forward and said what she preferred and what she didn't prefer.
Okay.
Why don't you go ahead and do that so that we can then maybe proceed to see if we've got consensus on any items?
Okay, and what I'll do is I'll just follow the staff report and
That would be great.
they have there. In general, the pilot parklet, actually, I would be in favor of keeping it permanent, but understand if we want to, at least at a minimum, come back and reevaluate at March 2021, I think that's reasonable. A lot of our business are putting significant investments in this. I like the different looks. And so, you know, to your point, Ms. Wren, of do we want a consistency? Do we want our 10? I actually like how each business is putting their own flavor and character to the different parklets. So with regards to the coverage, you know, fire safety, code safety, all that is paramount, but as well as having, I guess, good neighbor sharing so that one doesn't spill over. But I'm open to the ideas of coverage that meet their needs. That I think I'd like to defer that really to staff, because I'd hate for it to be delayed because things were coming back to us on a one-on-one basis, case-by-case basis. The leveling platforms and ramps, I agree with the town attorney. This is, I'd hate, at a very minimum, the ADA, I think the town should make those investments to help businesses that aren't already there. So I would like to see that move forward. And with regards to the unused parklets, definitely let's, those that aren't being used and won't be used in the foreseeable future, if we can put those aside. I very much would want that to free up some space. Also, it's not as, it's just not as, it doesn't look as nice. But overall, I think what I'm trying to, the biggest theme for me is let's continue the theme of what staff has been doing, with continue to work with the businesses. I'd rather provide flexibility and defer judgment to you. Let's make sure that all ADA codes, fire codes, and building structural codes are met so that it's safe for any of our visitors and residents. But in terms of the way it's coordinated and what it looks like, I personally like that differences so that each business gives its own flavor and character to it. And with regards to longevity, I like having them out there. I like the idea of a grant. For sure, a grant matching versus a full grant. I'm not in favor of the planters. I think it's an unnecessary cost. I like the way the K-rails look already, but I could see an incentive using grant funding to make things more structurally permanent, so that a lot of the issues that we're discussing, we won't have to revisit a year or 2 years from now.
Thank you, Councilwoman Sayoc. Before I go to Mr. Rennie, who already, I'm going to just jump in with my own, because I largely agree with Councilwoman Sayoc. I absolutely believe that the parklets should be permanent. I think that we have gotten the opportunity, as Ms. Farwell said, to experience outdoor dining and outdoor experience on North Santa Cruz. We're set up perfectly for that. And now we've had the opportunity to, I was going to say to see that the sky hasn't fallen, but you never know with the fires. But at least it hasn't fallen because of K-rails. So I think that the parklets are a great addition to the downtown. I would love to see them go, all over town where they make sense, frankly. And I do believe that there should be an equal opportunity for people to do that. And it's contained in the staff report that private businesses or shopping centers can continue to use those parking lots as they see fit. And I think that that should happen. But this is a really great opportunity to change the infrastructure and the downtown streetscape of North Santa Cruz, for example, without a huge investment from the town. So if we do use grants with matching, as Councilwoman Sayak said, to incentivize those owners to make them nice and to make them part of our streetscape, I think that is the way to go. And I think people are used to it and like it. Overhead, for rain protection, I leave that to fire, and heat, I leave that to fire, what's appropriate. Work with the town, as Councilwoman Sayak said, to make sure that permitting and ADA is in place. The unused parklets, yes, I'm okay with removing them. However, here's my issue. I like the unified look of the downtown, and if we can, it's like widening sidewalks or whatever else, and now we finally have the space that we need to do all kinds of stuff. If there is, consensus on the council to remove those that are not being used, then I would absolutely insist that whatever space is created only be used for curbside pickup and only be used for if and when we get that opportunity, for example, bike parking or Uber or Lyft or alternative transportation, rather than having what I frankly think would be dangerous, parking in between the parklets like we had on the pilot program, which I thought was just a horrible idea. So if those rails are removed in places, I would really want them to be, that space to be used for curbside pickup, alternative mobility, etc., but not being replaced with regular standardized 1950s parking. I do not think the pop-ups are a good idea for reasons that have been stated by the Vice Mayor. What hasn't been addressed is the process streamlining and the permit fee reduction. I think we need to continue that to give our businesses the opportunity to get back and recovering. It's worked really well. And thank you, Ms. Wren, and your staff and all staff, Mr. Morley, everyone, for making that work for our businesses so that we can continue our recovery. And I guess my theme throughout this is to get out ahead, do what needs to be done. Our state of affairs is not going to change anytime soon with our businesses. We can't rely on that. So why not use this opportunity to reimagine, reconstruct, and redevelop our downtown in partnership with our businesses and in partnership with our citizens? I don't think we need an independent commission. And that's why we have an elected council. So let's, those are my thoughts. And then I'm going to move to Mr. Rennie. And hopefully I see Ms. Pavetti taking notes. So I'm going to count on her to summarize what she's heard when we get to the end. So Mr. Rennie?
Thank you, Mayor. I will sound similar. Well, first of all, with the removing the unused ones, though, my vision is removing large sections where appropriate, like Soul Cycle. There's nothing past Soul Cycle, and I think the next part, there may be something up at Forbes Mills, the next place. I don't think it's a good idea to remove K-Rail and have one space or two spaces where somebody tries to park. I completely agree. Yeah, just make that pickup, drop off, and what do you call it?
Curbside pickup or mobility.
Pickup, yes, curbside pickup. I agree with that. But again, sections like in front of Soul Cycle, if that's not going to be used, you could remove that, and it won't create that patchwork of parking that I think I agree with. In terms of the permanent, the parklets, everybody's saying permanent. In concept, I like the idea of permanent, but the caveat might be at some point in the future, if we do a streetscape redesign, maybe they'll be incorporated or maybe they'll need to be removed. So, you know, staff report says 5 to 7 years. I think we may not do a streetscape design faster than that. So, you know, permanent is probably too strong a word, but you get what I mean. The K-Rail parklets, I think we should keep those through at least next summer. I see us not recovering from COVID completely before then, for sure. Reassess at that time. I see an evolution, though, of, again, there may be sections where they're not used anymore because our whole street isn't restaurants. I envision the restaurants that don't already have something in what we're calling the pilot parklet program may want to keep theirs. I do like the idea of assistance. I like the you know, as Councilmember Sack said, a grant program, as I was kind of alluding to before. I would prefer that the businesses or the property owners have some skin in the game, that we don't just do it all for them. And, you know, I understand some may be more limited in their means than others. Maybe they do more of the decoration and we make sure that there is a platform. You mentioned the idea. I don't think we need to force them to do one business at a time. I'm okay with the town coming in and say, well, it makes sense for us to build this structure for 3 units, as you mentioned, Monica. Again, I'd want them to contribute something to it. If it's we put up the roof and the platform and they provide decorations or however it works, I still want to have some skin in the game by the owners there. You know, my vision is, again, as it scales back, come next summer, we may say, well, we're going to keep some of those even longer than next summer, even though COVID is over, because it makes sense for our downtown. I'm thinking that, well, I'll just leave it at that. In terms of the, you know, covering, I think we need to allow them to have cover so they, you know, that something can happen during the winter. I think you need to have heaters so that people are willing to be out there when it's cold. There may be a fire issue with cover and heater. Maybe the corrugated metal is a way to have a heater that's safe, but I hesitate for unpainted corrugated metal because it starts to look like a shanty town. So I'd say I want something that's tasteful, but you know, I'm going to leave that up to PPW to determine what makes sense. I think you've gotten criticism when we've done things that didn't look good, so hopefully you can guide it so that it's tasteful. And in terms of the pop-ups, you know, you mentioned coffee or food pop-ups in the parklets. I disagree with that. We've got at least four places up and down the street where you can get coffee at the Great Bear Roasting Company or at the brewing place or Dulce Spacio. I don't think we need more coffee. I don't want to cannibalize their businesses. The same thing for food. There's a million places people can get takeout food, you know, from the bowl places, or the juice places even have some food, or the tea place has food. On delay takeout food. So I don't like the pop-up in the parklets. If there is building owners with inside spaces that are having trouble renting, I'm more willing to have them do some kind of pop-up. But I'm not thinking like a coffee shop pop-up. This is a different kind of pop-up idea. Continue our process streamline. I agree with. Did I cover everything? I think I covered all my notes.
Well, we have opportunity to come back if there's something you missed, but I was hoping to, Mr. Betty, I think I heard consensus on some areas. Why don't you let us know what you heard?
Thank you. And I'm going to go through the staff report just to make sure we're all using similar language. So on the pilot Parklet program, which Ms. Farwell addressed, there is consensus to make that quote unquote permanent, 5 to 7 years, recognizing that perhaps a new streetscape design might need some additional consideration, but for all intents and purposes, those owners that have made the investment should feel comfortable that it will essentially be permanent. With respect to the K-rail parklets, there was clear consensus that at least through March 2021, and then Councilmember Rennie mentioned through summer 2021, the Vice Mayor suggested that we might want to revisit this in March and maybe the council extends it. But essentially this way the businesses know that the K-rail will stay through the winter, if not longer. So that was great. I think the grant program, we mentioned grants in a couple of places in the staff report. So as this council was talking about grants, I was not hearing grants to incentivize the permanent parklets, but that may just be my misunderstanding. I heard grants to help with coverings, grants to help with ramps, but if it is the will of the council to also consider a grant program for the more permanent parklets, we could certainly pull that together. No interest in the planters, which is fine. So that was good. And then essentially very clear guidance that everyone needs to meet the fire code and the building code. Definite agreement that we should be flexible in the designs that businesses come up with, but it should be tasteful. And I do want to clarify that in some of the comments of council members, it sounded like there was an expectation that the town was going to be building the overhead structures and the ramps. But I don't think that's really a business we want to get into. I think we're more comfortable doing a matching grant and then letting the business get the permits, go through the process, and we'll streamline those processes as quickly as we can. And then on the unused parklets, the general consensus is that those that are really not being used, especially the big ones, should be removed. And that way space can be put back to use for bike parking, Uber, Lyft, or curbside pickup. Consensus that there should not be pop-up carts in the parklets. So that's very helpful for us. And then we really appreciate council's continued support for all the other economic initiatives that we've been implementing on private property, the fee reductions, and the process streamlining. You don't need to take formal action to continue any of that, but we really appreciate the endorsement to continue it. So I think the area that, at least for my mind, clarification on the grants and who's doing what in terms of coverage would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Perfetti. Okay, Mr. Rennie and Ms. Sayak, I was going to suggest just grouping what I did here as consensus into a motion and then moving to the questions that Ms. Perfetti had, but let me go to Mr. Rennie and then Ms. Sayak.
Just quickly, I was going to say, I do agree with the idea of grants towards more permanent parklets. Again, I'm thinking, I want to be fair to those that have spent full price, but I think our, longer term, my vision is longer term, more of those parklets would be good for our streets. So I'd like to enable them. And I definitely understand that it's a big lift for some. So I'd like to help out, but I'm thinking fairness also. So, whatever the right amount of assistance to get more of them. But, I think Stu Farwell had, maybe we give some retroactively back to the others. I don't know if we want to do that, but I want to figure out some way of enabling more of them to go forward in a fair way.
Okay, Ms. Sayak.
Actually, I'll echo Mr. Rennie's comments of, I was intending as well to incentivize. So.
Okay. Let me, anything from the Vice Mayor before I?
Yes, I would not give grants for more permanent parklets at this time. Our life and our economy and our future is very uncertain. And so to promise basically an undefined amount of money for an undefined number of future parklets, that would be a component of this consensus with which I would not support.
Okay, thank you. Let me try to convert what I heard into a motion, and then we'll move to the grants, etc. Let's see if we can. So I'll make a motion based upon the summary that I heard from Ms. Pravetti, and hopefully my notes have captured that as well, that we continue parklets on a permanent basis, at least through March, and 5 to 7 years, depending on how it goes. But certainly the motion is that to support a continuing parklet program and continuing existence of the parklets in place. Number 2, that the K-rail may stay in place except for those areas where it is not being used, and where it is removed, that the space that is created is used for Uber, alternate transportation, or curbside pickup. That all parklets should be ADA compliant, however that gets worked out, and should also be fire safe, however that gets worked out with fire. That number 3, that the streamlining on permits and processing fee reduction remain in place. That's what I heard as consensus, so that is my motion. Happy to receive a second and/or friendly amendments to the motion. And this is deliberately not including any question about the grants or who's responsible for payments of certain things.
I'll second it.
Okay, discussion on, yes, Ms. Pravetti.
I just was wondering if you wanted to add the pop-ups, because I
oh, yes, I'm sorry, yes. My motion does include no pop-ups in the existing parklets. Ms. Wren.
I need a little bit more clarity around the pop-ups. It's a multi-layer question. So I understand loud and clear that we're not looking to have the businesses pop up in our parklets. Now, oftentimes we will have a trunk show, we will have a retailer pop up inside another retailer. Are we speaking to this as well? And in addition to that, we have on the table an ask right now for a coffee to pop up on the private property of a restaurant in the mornings. So I want to make sure we're talking about the public property, the private property, and then inside the store. I heard some support around inside a building. And so I just want to make sure that we have clarity as we work with our businesses on this.
Thank you. So I'm going to try to include this in my motion. We'll see how people react, whether they want to vote for it or not, or whether they offer amendments. It was my understanding in the discussion of the pop-ups that we were discussing what a K-rail pop-up could do, not a generalized pop-up, no, you can't have them, et cetera, et cetera. My intent was to be directed just toward the K-rail parklets that we have, because that's what I understood the discussion was. So my motion goes only to pop-ups that now can occur within an existing K-rail parklet, or one that's already been built under our program. That's what I understood. So if somebody wants to change that or offer any amendments to that.
I can my second.
Okay, you continue your second. Okay. So this is basically permanent parklets, ADA compliant, fire safe, no pop-ups, continuing with streamlining and reduction of fees, I believe is contained in this motion. Mr. Schultz.
So I'm still not clear on the pop-up, and I think Ms. Wren gave a perfect example of the situation we're in right now. A restaurant has a CUP and has operating hours from 8 a.m. till 10 p.m. That restaurant traditionally has never been open in the morning, but now wants to use the K-rail area to bring in a subtenant to sell coffee. That's number one. That one's the complicated one. The easy one for me is you're a retail store, you don't have any restaurant CUP, and you want to sell coffee, you want to do some type of restaurant or food. To me, that's an easy one. You don't have a CUP, that's not within your CUP regulations. Therefore, it's not allowed. You'd have to amend your CUP to also be a retail store and a restaurant at the same time. So I'm not sure you answered that as to that first question of if they really do have a CUP, but traditionally have never provided that service, if it fits within their CUP, in my mind, they could do that. And we don't regulate whether someone wants to use a subtenant for a restaurant if they wanted a little part of their restaurant inside, that they'd be able to use that K-rail area. But that's what I want to clarify if they can't use that area.
Okay, so I'm going to continue with my motion. We'll see what the council thinks. What I heard from council members is we have plenty of places that sell coffee. We have plenty of places that sell food, and that we are not gonna, because you now have a pop-up parklet, that your business model or your CUP changes so that a retailer now becomes a coffee shop, or a restaurant that was never a coffee shop becomes a coffee shop, or things like that. My motion was directed toward, to answer your question, Mr. Schultz, I would say, no, they can't. If they have an existing CUP and they've traditionally not been open, can they suddenly put a pop-up vendor for coffee in? I'd say no, unless they wanted to change their CUP. My motion that I'm trying to summarize what I heard the council say is that no, we don't like the idea of a pop-up in the parklet context, whether you be an existing CUP granted restaurant, retailer, or whatever you are.
Perfect.
At least
that motion's clear.
So that's
then.
my motion. Okay. So
That makes
Mr.
it very
Rennie,
clear.
is that your understanding?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. All right. So any comments on this generalized motion that I hope encapsulates at least the consensus from the council on those points contained in the motion before I call the question? Okay. All right. So Mr. Rennie?
Aye.
Councilwoman Sack?
Aye.
Vice Mayor?
Yes.
And the mayor votes yes. So that, thank you very much, council. That contains those questions. Now, the questions that Ms. Pavetti raised that were still out there to be determined were the structure and use of any kind of grant process for the town. And as I understood it, and the town's participation in any, if any, in constructing or bringing these parklets up to code. Or have I gotten that right, Ms. Pavetti? Okay. All right, so I'm going to start the grant discussion with the Vice Mayor, just to make your position more clear on use of grants or not use of grants. I think that you had raised that issue. So hopefully you can clarify that for us.
Well, I can't right now, but I'll think about it.
Okay, all right. So Councilwoman Sack or Mr. Rennie, any further thoughts on any use of grants? Councilwoman Sack.
So I don't expect our staff to be building any of these structures. And when I look at the grant process, I definitely want to incentivize permanent parklets. And for the time being, what I'm imagining, if we stay with the K-rails, I want to utilize grants to help businesses that are not able to make it ADA compliant, to make it ADA compliant.
Okay. Any other discussion on this issue? Or if not, I'm going to invite Councilwoman Sack to make that into a motion.
Well, the town attorney has a question, so I'm not
Okay.
sure.
Just clarification on that issue about as we move forward and making them all comply with ADA requirements. There's been a lot of businesses that have already done that. So my question that comes to my mind is, ones that already have done it, would they be able to participate in the grant? They've already expended the money, a lot of businesses. Would they be able to recoup some of that past investment, or is it just moving forward with businesses now that still need to make that ADA, the ADA requirements?
At this time, I'd like to move forward in getting them to ADA compliance. What I don't want, especially with winter and slippery pavement is anyone to have an accident on our public streets. And so I'm inclined to move it forward, and if that's the way to do it, to incentivize it through grants. But I'm not at this time looking to go and be retroactive.
Okay. Mr. Rennie.
I just
Is
wanna-
that a motion, Ms. Zach? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Rennie.
I'm okay seconding that motion, but I also wanted to bring up, we keep talking about ADA, but there was also an issue of some of the ADA that was put in as summertime ADA and may not work if we have large amounts of water going down the street, and it may need to be torn up and redone, redesigned, or something like that. And how is that falling into our motion discussion?
And that I would see as moving forward, something that the town should be helping to fix.
Sounds good to me. I second.
So Councilwoman Zach, may I ask a question? Helping to fix via a matching grant program?
Correct.
Not going out there with a shovel?
Correct. And not doing it 100% by the town.
All right.
I'm looking at a matching program.
And before I get to the Vice Mayor, just one more question to clarify on your motion. Ms. Privetti asked, would this grant program, matching grant program, I think I heard you say, just to make sure I understand it, could it be used to help transition a temporary K-rail parklet to a permanent parklet?
Yes.
And I heard you say that, yes, it could be. Is
Correct.
that, am I correct? Okay. Vice Mayor?
My question was, with regard to this funding from the town, do we have any order of magnitude as to amount? Guess the answer is no.
We still have significant budget remaining in our economic recovery fund. We would need to look at what some costs might be for the ADA ramps, fixing drainage, et cetera. Matt may have kind of thumbnail estimates for us, but we do know that the permanent parklets, as testimony early this evening said, that's on the orders of thousands of dollars, and I don't see the town doing a 50% match for that. But maybe Matt can give us an order of magnitude of what ADA and drainage improvements cost.
Thanks, Laurel. I think you covered most of what I was going to say. It'd be nice to have sort of percentages, knowing what the full parklet costs are for the permanent parklets, and what percentage the town might want to contribute to that. You also sort of have an idea of what our remaining budget is in the economic recovery fund, so that could play into it as well. As far as making the existing sort of work with ADA compliance and making adjustments there, we have a little bit of work to do, I think, to do inspections of those and see what they look like. We haven't done that officially yet, so we may want to look through and make sure we've captured everything, and then identify for those that need to do the work in the drainage. There's probably a handful that need to do some adjustments to make it work through the winter, address what that might look like and what the costs are. It's going to vary from parklet to parklet, but again, maybe a percentage of that cost, if the council has an idea of what that might, what seems fair, and then you could give us direction to move it forward, or you could ask us to come back with a sort of a more structured program if that's what would work for you.
So Ms. Zach, as the maker of the motion, what's your pleasure on that?
What I'd like to do is I'd like to prioritize the remaining money that we have in our downtown revital. I forgot what the title of that, the 1.9, prioritize that so that it goes towards ADA for the temporary parklets, and that staff look at bringing back in the future. So in January, when we do a prioritization, what a permanent parklet pilot program would look like with the matching, and that would allow staff to have some time to give us magnitude of how much that would cost. But at least it gets us through the winter months. All
right, Mr. Rennie, you had your hand up.
I was under the impression we still have well over $1 million in that fund. I thought it was closer to $1.5 million. So I'm having trouble imagining how the ADA matching grants would get anywhere close to using that up.
I think, Ms. Sayak, you were suggesting that whatever we did immediately with respect to any kind of matching grant would be prioritized and directed toward ADA and ramps so that these places would be usable and safe for the winter.
Correct.
And then that we would come back with staff recommendation for potentially matching grants to convert temporary to permanent.
Correct.
Is that your intent?
Correct. And that would be part of the conversation at the beginning of the year of how to allocate funds. So.
And that the funding come from our repurposed downtown streetscape fund. Exactly. What do we call it now? Economic Recovery Fund?
Yes.
And did you have any dollar percentage or dollar amount in mind?
I don't have a percentage amount just because I don't, what's the context? I don't know how much each of these, we don't know how many parklets, we don't know how much it's going to cost. Listening to Director Morley, it sounds like there may be a little bit more analysis that the department may have to do. Okay. Unless unless staff do have that number.
So
Ms. Red, I'm sorry.
I would just say anecdotally, I don't know how many still need to comply with ADA and which ones do and which ones might have to make some revisions for drainage. But I've been at least told the one parking space is between $1,000 and $4,000 is what they're spending. So it's not a large chunk of money to build the structure so that, it's level with the sidewalk. That's just what I've heard, between $1,000 and $4,000.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. And Ms. Wren, you had your hand up.
So we have 27 parklets in place, and there's 42 businesses using those parklets. And then of those 42 businesses, 9 have built platforms. So some of those will bridge more than one business, but in most cases they do not. So you may have a discrepancy between one being compliant and one being storm drain okay and the one next door not. But if we are looking at doing something either per parklet, there's 27 in place at this point, and then there's 42 individual businesses using those.
Okay. Given all that information, Ms. Sayak, would you like to restate your motion?
I'm actually comfortable with it right now. I'm not precluding anything. I'm prioritizing the ADA work that needs to happen during the winter. And, okay. And if we find out that staff is capable of doing more and would like to bring those numbers back to us, I'm comfortable with that. But at least I'd like to get this process started.
Okay, and Mr. Rennie, are you comfortable in maintaining your second?
Yes.
Okay, and Vice Mayor, you had your hand up.
Yeah, question for Ms. Wren. When we're talking about the numbers that she just gave us, are those just downtown or are they also in other parts of the town? And also before we do a call on the motion, if somebody could restate it. Thank you.
So the parklets that I just discussed are downtown with the exception of one, which is just in the C1 district on the other side of Highway 9. The way that the economic resolution was written when we did it in June is that if you have private property, you supply your own tents, your own platform. So even in the case of downtown, we do have a few businesses who are using their own parking lot. They must provide their own furnishings. So the town just provided K-rail on public space. Anyone using private space, be it downtown or outside of downtown, is asked to implement their own product for the barriers. Because in that case, they may not need traffic rated barriers. The way that staff looked at it is we funded the K-rail because we were creating a safe delineation between the traffic on the street and the folks that are eating in the parking spaces. Whereas in the parking lots, we're looking at how we can kind of chunk off spaces for the businesses to use. They submit a plan to us and then what kind of barriers they're using. But in some cases, they don't need to be traffic rated. They can be ADC would use. And so in that case, we have not dictated, for lack of a better word, what goes in private spaces.
Did that address your inquiry, Vice Mayor?
Sure.
Or at least close. All right. Maybe Ms. Privetti, you could restate the motion for us as you understand it.
As I understand it, the motion is that the town would develop a grant program to prioritize ADA and drainage compliance, including fixing any problems that might need to be fixed. And this would occur in the K-Rail projects. And then we would come back in January with a proposal as to how we could create a grant program to incentivize the more permanent parklets.
All right, and Ms. Sack, does that reflect your motion?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Rennie, your second?
Yes.
Okay. Any other discussion before we call this question? All right. Councilwoman Sack?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Spector?
Yes.
Councilman Rennie?
Yes.
And the mayor votes yes, it passes unanimously. I think that may have covered the remaining question of who is going to do the building. Am I correct, Ms. Betty? You're nodding.
Yeah, I think I'm sorry, Mayor.
No, go ahead.
In the course of the discussion, it became clear that the town council is not expecting PPW to get out there and start building these structures. So that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Is there, Ms. Wren or Ms. Privetti, any item in the staff report that you think has not been covered by council discussion or motion?
I have two remaining questions if the
Okay.
council has a moment.
Yeah, go ahead.
The first would be that when we come back to that pop-up question, are we comfortable? So as I understand the parklets, I would transfer that to pop-ups are not accepted on public space at all. So be it a sidewalk, be it a retailer or a restaurant, that we're really looking to support our brick and mortar businesses. And to the extent that maybe they have a trunk show with a brand inside, that's one thing, but adding another use or adding something outside of their main core business model is not acceptable. Would that be correct?
I'm going to look to the council. Just raise your hand if you think that that was correct. Okay, yes. So I don't know that we need to, all four council people raised their hand for Ms. Wren's statement. So we do agree with Ms. Wren's statement as to our vision of restrictions or not restrictions on pop-ups. Is that adequate for our record, Ms. Privetti, Mr. Schultz? Okay. What was your second question, Ms. Wren?
The second question comes out of the expansion of the K-Rail parklet. So to the extent that we continue to get new businesses that maybe aren't using them right now, or we remove Soul Cycles and all of a sudden they open up and they want one. We had the position where we had to close off Petticoat to allow for some construction porta potties to exist. And now the businesses are requesting that street remain closed. We're looking for the council to understand how much we want to expand this. It was staff's intent in this case to reopen Petticoat to allow the traffic to move back through. The businesses are asking for it to remain closed. So what's the temperature of the council on expanding the K-Rail program even further beyond what it is right now?
Okay, well, I'll start out because it's my prerogative. I would like to expand it as much as possible as businesses are able to open. So do I want to, I like what's going on with North Santa Cruz. I like where we've been able to expand, businesses out to where they're available. If something opens where they can take advantage of what the council's already said that they can do, my vote would be great. Let's allow them to do that. So I'm fine with, as things come in, can they take advantage of that? In my mind, yes. So I'm going to go to other council members to see what they think about that. Mr. Rennie.
I think I agree with all of that. I'm not sure where Petticoat is. That name's not ringing a bell, but as long as the K-Rail parklet is being used, I'm okay with expanding it. My concern is leaving unused. Again, it's valuable parking spaces. Let's make sure there's a valuable use, and air by itself is not a valuable use. I would leave the one caveat, let's make sure that we have adequate traffic flow. I'm sure that PPW will advise us on that.
So Vice Mayor or Councilwoman Sack, any thoughts on that? Councilwoman Sack?
Consistent with what both you and Councilmember Rennie have said.
Vice Mayor? Any thoughts? No? You're fine? Okay. So Ms. Wren, I think that what I've heard the consensus is that we are, to the extent that businesses are opening and want to take advantage of that K-rail opportunity, that the council's temperature, as you put it, is that that's fine with us. Do we need to make that more clear, Mr. Vetti or Mr. Schultz? Or is that good enough?
I would just defer to Monica to make sure that she has the direction that she needs as she works with those businesses.
Is that sufficient for you, Ms. Wren?
Yes, yes, and we can just work with those folks on Petticoat. I just worry about the access to Village now that that street is completely closed, so we can work it with trying to limit some of the space being used there so that the access can be regained to Village Avenue.
Okay. All right, that sounds good. I think that the council, what you've heard from the council tonight is that we want to be flexible to allow our businesses to operate in the best way they can. And to the extent that that means it's K-rail, great. To the extent that that means that we're going to allow some access to businesses that need it, I think we want to be able to do that. But so I think that what you're hearing is we want to continue the progress in trying to work with our businesses, but we don't want to cut off avenues. So, you know, can we keep a K-rail? I think the council is saying yes. If access is needed, you know, I think the council would understand. Okay, great. But I guess what we're trying, I think what I hear from us is we're trying to give you that flexibility to work with the businesses to see what they need. Do you need anything else?
I think that pretty much covers everything, unless Rob, was there any other questions that we need to address tonight?
I think she was directing that to Rob Schultz, but Rob Rennie, I see that you have your hand up, so hang on a second.
My only one is yes, staff will work and put together this grant program to get all of these ADA compliant. I suspect and hope that all will, but what if they don't? And so if they don't, my response would be then they would lose their K-rail parklet. And so yeah, I want to confirm that's where we would head with it. If a business just refuses to put forth that investment or participate in a grant program, then they would lose their K-rail parklet.
Okay, I didn't hear.
I could bring that back at that time if we don't get full compliance.
So that's not something that the council reached. What we're trying to do is get people to comply. I think what I heard from our motions, I for one wouldn't be comfortable in saying, yeah, we're going to yank it if you don't do it. I think what I heard is we are offering a grant program to make sure you get into compliance, and that we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Okay. If somebody doesn't do it. Anyone disagree with that position? Mr. Rennie, I know you have your hand up, but if it's for a different subject, take it down for a sec. Okay, so Mr. Rennie now. Go ahead.
I want to check with two items that I'm not sure whether we fully covered them. So the covers and the heaters, I think we said we're okay with them having them, but we're not participating in any grant programs for that. I think is where we are on that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. We'll let other council members. I'll leave that as to make sure that that's okay with them. They can speak up. Second item was the conversion to permanent parklets. Does staff need more on that? I think what our motion said, we're going to prioritize money towards getting things ADA compliant and drainage. And then are we allowing some money go to assist towards permanent parklets?
So the motion that was approved said, ask that staff return in January with a grant program to incentivize the permanent parklets.
And is that adequate? Do you think people will want to work on it before January, or is it okay to wait that long?
We'll continue to work with the business community. If there are, I know we have some businesses that would love to go straight to permanent, but I think we have to look at what the costs are going to be and what the town's fair share should be, especially given the fairness value that the council mentioned earlier for the previous investment that certain property owners have already made. So I think it's best if we focus our efforts, because quite frankly, Monica, Matt, Rob Schultz, the team has been working so hard. I don't know how many hours all of our staff has been putting into this. I think we're going to have our hands full, quite frankly, just trying to get ADA compliance and drainage compliance done, fire code met for heaters. I mean, we're going to be just crazy busy in the next month or so, if not longer. So I think if we can wait on the incentive.
Well, that's okay for me. I'm really asking, is it okay to wait? And I think you're saying it's probably okay to wait, but we definitely need to wait. And when you come back with it, I envision something like, by then you'll maybe understand the numbers a little better. And I envision you might suggest something like, we'll do a 30% match not to exceed 20,000 and the total budget not to exceed 200. I'm just making up numbers, but after you look into it further, I could envision some suggestion from staff like that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, anything else before we adjourn? I've got a message on my screen. My battery is running low.
We have a couple parklets in the process, so we will just continue to process those permanent parklets or semi-permanent parklets as we would. We can definitely let those folks know about this conversation that January may hold that, but in the meantime, we will just continue to process those applications and move folks through as they want to add them.
Okay. Anything further? Ms. Wren, you were very kind to thank the council for the initiatives that it took at the beginning of this economic recovery. Thank you. Let me take this opportunity on behalf of the council to thank the staff, as Ms. Rivetti mentioned, for all the work that you have been doing, for all your innovation, for your flexibility, for your creativity, and for your willingness to step up during this entire time and make sure that Los Gatos is functioning as well as it can, and frankly, better than many places are. And that's in large part due to our amazing staff. So on behalf of the council, thank you very much. And with that, good night all.